The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Story 1. My best friend is obsessed with the 27 Club. Self-harm. It all started the day we found Charlie's sister in the barn. Erica had returned to our little town from the city to celebrate her 27th birthday. She was sporting a nose ring and had choppy black hair. She had brought her boyfriend Blake with her. With his long black hair and dark wayfarers, Charlie and I were 14 at the time and thought they looked like rock stars. Their parents had arranged a party on the grounds of their property. Charlie and I had our first taste of alcohol that night and coughed our guts up when Erica and Blake let us take drags of their cigarettes. "I love you, Chaz," said Erica, her arms around Charlie and me. "You too, Glenn. Promise me you boys will do whatever makes you happy." We had no idea it was her way of saying goodbye. The next day, there was confusion in the house when Erica and Blake were nowhere to be seen. They'd spent the night in her old bedroom. I'd spent the night on Charlie's bedroom floor. "Did you see your sister leave?" asked his mom. We hadn't. She wasn't answering her cell either. Later that day, Charlie and I went to the barn to look for Erica. When we opened the doors, we saw her lying in the arms of Blake on a bed of straw. We put it down to too much vodka. "We found them," yelled Charlie. "Wake up, sleepyheads." As we got closer, we saw an empty bottle of vodka, along with a small empty pot for high-strength sleeping pills, the kind for prescription only. "Erica," said Charlie, shaking his sister. "She was out cold." "Glenn, she's not breathing." Blake started to stir like he was in pain. "Mr. and Mrs. Morgan," I screamed, running out of the barn. Erica and Blake were rushed to the hospital. As feared, Erica was dead at the scene. Blake had his stomach pumped and was put in a ward to recover. She wanted this. He managed through God knows what other drugs they had put him on. "What the fuck do you mean?" said Erica's dad, grabbing Blake by the front of his smock. He had to be escorted out in tears along with his wife. I sat with Charlie until my parents could come pick me up. We just stared at Blake, this guy who we had thought was so cool, pale with greasy black hair plastered to his face. "She got in. Dudes," he said. "What did she get in?" said Charlie, close to tears. "My sister is dead." "But she's with them now." He looked up. "Morrison, Joplin, Hendricks. Who are you talking about?" I said. "Only the greatest to ever live. The 27 Club." He stepped out of bed, wincing, pulling out the tubes in his arms. I still remember the trickles of blood running down his wrists. "What the hell is the 27 Club?" "Strictly members only," he said. "No admittance to anyone even a day before or after turning 27. I turned 2 weeks ago, and we were saving it to go together, forever 27 with the legends." He walked to the window. "Say, what floor are we on?" I shrugged. "6th, I think." He looked out and turned with a grin. "I bet she's up there partying with Cobain as we speak." He opened the window. "Blake," said Charlie, "I think you should get back in bed." "Forever 27, boys," he said. "See you in a few years." He leapt from the window, making Charlie and I cry out in unison. We heard a gruesome thud as he hit something hard. When I braved a peek, he was face down on the roof of an ambulance. After the events, Charlie became obsessed with the 27 Club. When we turned 16, he wanted to form a suicide pact. We would wait until we both turned 27, then end it together. "These people meant nothing to you," I said. "When did you ever talk about the Doors?" or Jimi Hendrix, and everyone has those fucking Nirvana t-shirts. It means nothing. It's not just that, Glenn, he said. It's honoring my sister. You loved Erica too. I did. But she had problems. Charlie, it's not even a real club. It's not a conspiracy. It's not some amazing club where they're all living it up in paradise. They're unfortunate coincidences. Plenty of other cool people have died at 26 or 28. Before I could react, he pulled out a penknife and sliced open my right palm. I screamed, Jesus, what the fuck, Charlie? He did the same to himself, barely reacted to the pain, then gripped my hand in his. Forever 27. We're bound by blood now. My brother. You're fucking crazy, I said, leaving his house. My hand kept slipping on the handlebar of my bike until I got home to patch myself up. Some years passed, and I'd kept my distance from Charlie. I started college and got a new circle of friends. I remember July 23rd, 2011, like it was yesterday. I was 21. Even before Charlie texted me, I knew he would as soon as I heard the news. Amy Winehouse is dead. She was 27. The scar on my right palm began to ache. I wasn't going to contribute to crazy, so I ignored him. I met with my girlfriend Laurie and our group of friends for a night out. Of course, Winehouse was the topic of the evening. She had managed to become a cultural phenomenon in such a short amount of time, and her death was genuinely hard-hitting. And what better way to celebrate the life of a tortured soul than by keeping the drinks flowing and partaking in the coke our friend Shane had scored. Are you guys familiar with the concept of the 27 Club? Asked Laurie. I swallowed my whiskey and cleared my throat. Yeah, that's an exclusive group of celebrities who croaked it at 27. Right, said Shane. Exactly, she said. Anyone who's anyone is part of that club. She held up a glass to Amy and the 27 Club. Hear, hear, said Shane. May she forever shoot up with my idol, Kurt Cobain, in that big club in the sky. That's a bit insensitive, I said. She literally died hours ago. Have some respect. I'm respecting, buddy, he said. This is all for her. Are you okay, Glenn? Said Laurie. My palm was burning. I ran a finger over the scar and held it up to them. I never told you how I got this, I said. My childhood best friend, Charlie. His sister killed herself when she was 27. Her boyfriend, too. Shit, said Shane. Charlie did this to me when we were 16. He cut my hand and made us blood brothers. He wanted me to make a suicide pact, that we would end it at 27. Glenn, I had no idea, said Laurie. I pushed it away, I said. I cut all ties with him, but he texted me today, funnily enough, on the day the 27 Club gets a new member. I feel awful, said Shane. If I'd known, I wouldn't have. Look, it's fine, I said. I'm all for celebrating life or death. I guess I'm just being sensitive. It kind of all came back. A few more years passed. Laurie and I were married and had a baby boy, Jack. We lived in a house not a million miles away from where I grew up. One week, I was feeling particularly agitated, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I realized what it was when I spoke to my mom on the phone. Will you be seeing Charlie for his birthday? She asked. I know you boys don't see each other as much as you used to, but you were inseparable once upon a time. I hear it's the big 2-7. He could probably use the support. What with, well, you know. I'll message him, I said before saying goodbye. I didn't want to be a prick, so I kept it polite. Hey, Charlie, I wish you a happy birthday. Maybe we can meet for a drink sometime soon. I'm only like 2 hours away from our old town. Love, Glenn. About an hour later, I got a notification. Glenn, my brother, thank you for the birthday wishes. I hear you have a little one of your own now. Me too, little Joseph. I would love to meet for a drink sometime. You stay in touch. Love, your friend Charlie. What was most surprising about it was that he didn't mention his age at all. There was no "I'm 27 now," and you know what that means. Years of guilt hit me like a sledgehammer to the teeth. I had neglected who was once my most important friend due to an admittedly messed up experience, but clearly one he could have used more support with. I had abandoned him. The scar on my hand burned as if to remind me of the wrong I'd done to him. A few days later, I reached out again. I suggested we meet at one of our old haunts, but he invited me to his home on account of watching his son. He was still based in our old town and had a nice but modest house. Courtesy of the rents, he said. Charlie's parents had done rather well for themselves and owned several properties around town. I'd like you to meet someone. There was a basket perched on a wooden frame, and out he pulled a baby wrapped in a blanket. His little eyes were half open. This is Joseph. Say hello to your Uncle Glenn. He handed Joseph to me, who I awkwardly cradled in my arms until I found the right position. He's the spit of you, Charlie, I said, looking down at his cute little face. He reached up and grabbed my nose with his sharp baby nails. Forgot how much that stings, I said. Jack is currently enjoying his terrible twos. He's a bit of a handful for Laurie and myself at times. Come sit down, he said. How is the old ball and chain? I laughed. She's actually perfect. I can't recall a single disagreement we had, other than what to name Jack. She wanted to name him Donald after her grandfather. That wasn't going to happen. He laughed. Where's your better half? Anyway, I don't think we ever met. He looked down. Susie. She's no longer with us. It's just little Joey and me. Charlie, I'm so sorry. It wasn't long after his birth. She just didn't wake up one morning. He smiled. We disagreed about his name, too. I wanted to name him Joseph after Joseph Merrick, more commonly known as the Elephant Man. He was the first official member of the 27 Club. I took in a deep breath as I felt unease set in. Charlie, you can't still be obsessed with that club. He reached over and took Joseph from me. Did you hear Anton Yelchin is also a member now? Don't try and tell me it's not real. Okay, I'm gonna leave you to it, I said. Charlie, promise me you'll look after yourself and Joseph. You know where I am if you need any help. Appreciated, he said, laying Joseph down in the basket. Say, isn't your birthday coming up soon? I gulped. Yeah, in a few weeks. Laurie and I are having a weekend in the Hamptons. I lied. Ah, good for you, he said. I hope the weather holds out for you. He held out his hand, palm side up, clearly showing me the scar we shared. Put it there, brother. I firmly yet quickly shook his hand and made my way out of his house. He's still not right, I said to Laurie later that evening. It's been over 10 years and he's still obsessed with that fucking club. Try to be more sensitive, Glenn. He lost his sister, and now his wife too, as well as raising a baby on his own. The poor guy is probably so lost right now. I'm trying, Laurie, but that little reminder of my birthday didn't sit right with me. It was like, remember what that means. The thing is, it means nothing to me. I didn't agree to a damn thing. I didn't ask for this scar. She kissed the top of my head. I'm putting Jack to bed, then taking a bath. Why don't you listen to one of your podcasts? Take your mind off things. Good idea, honey, I said, but not before the tickle monster attacks. I grabbed Jack and blew raspberries on his belly, which sent him into fits of giggles. Okay, that's enough excitement for one day, said Laurie. Give me a hug, I said to Jack. Good night, buddy. Night, Daddy, he said, then disappeared upstairs with Laurie. I put in my earbuds and started listening to the latest How Bizarre podcast. I was content for all of 10 minutes when I started thinking about Charlie. I opened Google and typed in Charlie Morgan, followed by our hometown. One of the first results was from a local newspaper. The headline was something like, "Redacted man becomes single father after sudden tragedy." It mentioned his wife Susie had passed away from breathing complications during sleep. My heart skipped a beat when I read she was 27 at the time of death. I then started to groan as my scar burned as if freshly cut. I knew in my heart Charlie was responsible for Susie's death. I was turning 27 in just over 2 weeks. I called my mom. "You sound agitated." "Sweetheart," she said, "what's the matter?" "Why didn't you tell me about Charlie's wife?" "I did. I mentioned how he's had a rough go of it in life, but you didn't seem to be interested. Too occupied with childish rivalries or whatever you call it." I felt terrible. "I'm sorry. Mother, did you attend the funeral?" "I did. Don't worry. I mentioned how busy you were and you would have been there if you could." "Mom, do you think there's any chance Charlie knows where we live?" "Would that be a bad thing? You were best friends. After all, can you just answer me, please?" "Yes. He knows where you live. Was I not supposed to tell him during his crisis? Should I have read your mind?" No. I'm sorry. Mom, I'm not mad. Look, Laurie and I are thinking of going to the Hamptons for my birthday weekend. Would you be able to have Jack?" "You mean I get to spend the whole weekend with my little Jackie boo?" That was 100% yes. When Laurie came downstairs after her bath, I grabbed her. She let out a little yelp. "You haven't made plans for my birthday, have you?" "No, not yet. I was thinking of having everyone over for a BBQ, bouncy castle for the kids, bucking bronco for the big kids. How about we get away? Just the two of us. Go to the Hamptons and rent a romantic cottage on the beach." "How bourgeois," she chuckled. "Should we rent a garish Lamborghini too?" I laughed. "If you want. My folks have already said they'll have Jack for the weekend." My birthday came around on a Friday. That morning, Laurie drove Jack to my parents while I finished packing our weekend bags. Laurie has already specifically picked out some fancy dresses to show off to the douchebags who summer in the Hamptons. I think she was looking forward to seeing how the other half lived and making snide remarks behind their backs. I was also in charge of collecting our neon green Lamborghini, which got the whole neighborhood snooping as I pulled it into our driveway. After an hour or so, Laurie hadn't returned. I just assumed Mom and Dad were chewing her ears off, so I gave her a call. It went straight to voicemail, so I called my mom instead. "Is Laurie still with you?" I asked. "We kind of need to get on the road." "No, sweetheart, we haven't seen Laurie yet." My heart dropped. "She left over an hour ago." "Oh, maybe she stopped for gas or something." "For an hour?" "Don't snap at me. Glenn, there could be traffic. I'm sure she's fine." "You're right. I'm sorry. I'll keep trying her cell. Please let me know when she gets to you." My stomach was in knots as I hung up and tried Laurie's cell again. 3 hours of calls and texts later. Nothing. I kept checking local traffic news to see if there was congestion, or God forbid an accident. "Mom, I'm so worried," I said, calling her back. "Do you think I should call the police?" "Oh, sweetheart, I don't think they'd do anything after a few hours. Stay positive." My mind kept going to Charlie. It was my 27th birthday. After all, I dialed his cell. "Glenn," he answered. "Happy birthday. My brother." I could hear the rumblings of an engine in the background. "Is this a bad time?" I asked. "Are you driving?" "Oh no, it's the perfect time. I'm not driving, but hold on. I'll just put you onto the driver." After a few seconds, I heard her. "Glenn, we're okay. We're driving to..." It was Laurie, but she was cut off short. "Okay, that's enough." "What the fuck have you done?" "Charlie." I spat down the phone. "You bring my family back now." "Do you know how kind your wife is?" he said. "She saw me on the side of the road and stopped to give me a ride. Such a sweetie. She told me all about your little birthday getaway and, well, I had to insist on being there myself. I couldn't miss your 27th after all." My stomach was in knots. "Please, Charlie. Please bring them back to me." I think you should come here, he said. We'll be at the cottage in around 3 hours or so. I heard you have some wheels of your own. Sounds like you'll be traveling in style. Charlie, I pleaded. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for your sister. I'm sorry for abandoning you. Please, just come back to me. Let's talk about it man to man. You'll either be there or not. But if not, I've got another little friend who would love to make acquaintances with Laurie and Jack. I heard a click. He has a gun. Glenn, said Laurie. I'm coming. Just don't hurt them. Charlie, please, I'm coming. Good. Oh, and no police and all that shit, of course. You know how it goes. See you later. Brother. He hung up. I inhaled a sharp breath and screamed into the house. The first thing I did was collect the handgun we kept on the top shelf of our bedroom closet. Then I went downstairs and spotted a handmade birthday card from Jack on the kitchen counter, with a cupcake next to it. You could see Laurie's influence in the words as she had guided his little hand with a paintbrush. Happy birthday to the best daddy in the world. I fought back the tears, shoved the delicious cupcake into my mouth, and got into that ugly-assed Lamborghini, putting my foot down and raising my middle finger at the neighborhood watch, who shook their fists at me. It took me 4 hours to reach the cottage in the Hamptons we'd rented on Airbnb. I put the gun down the front of my pants and walked inside, my heart ready to explode. I was greeted by the smell of rich tomato sauce. Laurie was sitting at a dining chair, her hands strapped to the sides with thick twine. Charlie was standing over the cooker, stirring a saucepan. I could see a playpen with Jack sitting up playing with toys, and baby Joseph was lying on his back, waving his arms around. I'm here, I said, making my presence known. Laurie went from looking terrified to mild relief. Oh, I heard that god-awful car pull up, said Charlie. Half the neighborhood probably did. You're just in time. I made pasta. Thanks and all, but I'm not hungry. I went straight over to Laurie. Are you hurt? She shook her head. No, honey, I'm fine. Jack's fine, too. I kissed her and went over to the playpen. Jack giggled when he saw me, holding up a plastic dinosaur. Joseph clung onto a plush toy of a blue dog. Don't they look so cute together? Said Charlie. Brothers from a different mother, just like us. I pulled the gun from my pants and turned to face Charlie. You're not the Charlie I called my best friend for years. You need help. This obsession has gone on long enough. Tell me, did you kill your wife? What? Said Laurie from the table. Charlie grinned. I forget how clever you are. You were always the brains, helping me with homework and stupid math tests that mean absolutely nothing. I loved you, Charlie, but this is too much. So I'm taking my wife, and I'm taking my son. I think under the circumstances we'll be taking Joseph, too. I sincerely hope you get the help you need so one day he can have a relationship with his dad. I walked over to Laurie, but she yelled out, "Wait!" Charlie started to laugh. Did you think it would be that easy? Just look inside her blouse. I peeked inside and saw an electronic device strapped to her chest. It had a numerical display that was counting down. There were 46 minutes remaining. If she moves from that spot before the timer runs out, a shot of adrenaline will be pumped into her heart. We're talking about an insane amount of adrenaline, enough to knock out an elephant. She simply won't make it. What do you want from me? I yelled. He walked towards me and took the gun from my hand, putting it on the table. Then he held up his scarred palm and held it against mine. That burning sensation came back. I want us to share a bottle, then live up to our pact. But I didn't make the pact. I screamed. You forced it on me. Come on, Glenn. We owe this to my sister and to Blake, to Basquiat, Winehouse, Morrison, Cobain, Joplin, to all those legends. You're insane, I said, pushing him against the wall. Careful, all it takes is one little click, and Laurie's heart goes boom, and little Jack and Joey will be left orphans. You're actually going to take your own life with your baby boy right there? He nodded. I've been committed to this since I was 14 years old. If you do exactly what I say, Lori lives. She can take Jack and Joey and be the hero of the story. Now, I checked your birth certificate. You were born at 2119, which is when you'll officially turn 27. Lori's heart device will become useless at 2130, at which point she can wriggle out of those ropes and get out of here. But not before we've taken a special concoction I've made to honor my sister. My legs went weak, and I had to sit down on the floor. You actually want me to end my life with you? Forever 27. Glenn, you'll thank me when we're living it up. Don't do it. Honey, said Lori. Yeah, that's not an option, said Charlie. You see, if he refuses, I'll put a bullet in his head. Then I'll watch as your heart explodes. I started to cry. I felt so weak, so powerless. But I think the worst thing of all was that Charlie was my friend. We'd been estranged for years, but he was my friend. May I kiss my wife? I asked. Of course. I'm not a monster. I stood up and walked over to Lori, gently hugging her. I could feel the metallic device against my chest as I kissed her. Don't do this, she said, tears streaming. I love you. Lori, look after our boy. I went over to the playpen and picked up Jack, who looked so oblivious to everything. Dada, he said, gently patting my face. I love you, Jack, I said, kissing his cheek. He wiped his cheek like it was the most disgusting thing he'd experienced. Look after Mama. I reached down and stroked little Joseph's face. I wish things could have been different for you, little one. All right, we get it, said Charlie. Outside. Now, despite the disturbing situation I found myself in, the night was beautiful. A dinner table had been set up on the deck behind the cottage. There was a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. The moon was low, the temperature mild, the sounds of the ocean gentle. It was supposed to be me and Lori, enjoying a meal and maybe a spot of lovemaking on the dunes like we were teenagers again. Sit down, he said. I've waited weeks for this. I almost did it without you, but my scar burned like a motherfucker. Do you ever get that? I shrugged as I sat down. Yeah, you do. It's because we're connected. He poured 2 whiskeys and pushed one towards me. I didn't hesitate, downing it in one go, shuddering a little at the afterburn. That's good shit, I said. It's gotta be the best, he said. It's a 10-year-old single malt. I pushed out my glass for another, which he obliged. Suppose I'd better catch up. He downed it and checked his watch. 1:15. Now's as good a time as any. He pulled out a glass vial from his pocket containing a clear liquid. This is a highly concentrated mix of xyloplon, Valium, Klonopin, and ethanol. He opened it and poured half into my glass, and the other half into his. The beauty is we'll probably be asleep before any of the nasty side effects take hold. I took a deep breath and downed some whiskey straight from the bottle. Gimme that, he said, and did the same. He then pulled out his gun and placed it on the table. I could feel tears streaming down my face. You were my brother, Charlie, I said. How could you do this to me? Because I love you, he said. You and I, forever 27. I can't think of anything more beautiful than that. He looked at his watch again and beamed. 21:19. It's officially your birthday. Glenn, welcome to 27. Oh, how I've waited for this. Please, Charlie, think of Jack. Think of Joseph. He needs his daddy. He picked up the gun. Drink it. I picked up the glass and swirled the clear mixture around. The smell was like pure alcohol. Then I looked to the sky, the moon, the stars, and the ocean. To Lori and to Jack, I said, downing the mixture. It burned like freshly boiled water as it went down, making me clutch my throat. As soon as it reached my stomach, it was like a sucker punch to the gut. I stumbled off the chair and fell to the ground, clutching my belly. "I'm coming." "Brother," said Charlie, picking up his glass. But before he could take a sip, a gunshot sounded out. I heard the glass smash on the ground and had enough time to see a single trickle of blood drip down his forehead before he collapsed. Then I passed out. A week later, I was awake in a hospital bed. It turns out my wife is a genius. She figured out that if she could force something between her chest and the adrenaline shot, she'd be able to move freely. So, while Charlie and I were sitting outside, Laurie freed her hands. Charlie was no expert when it came to knots, apparently, and wedged a dinner plate against her chest. When the device activated, it shattered the plate, causing a small cut to her chest, but otherwise leaving her unharmed. She then used my gun, which Charlie had left on the table, to shoot him in the head. It wasn't a fatal shot, though just enough to render him unconscious. He was being kept on a different floor in the hospital. On the day of my release, I went to see him. He had tubes coming out of his arms, mouth, and thighs. Despite what he's put me through, it gave me no pleasure to see him that way. We've become temporary guardians to Joseph Morgan, Charlie's son, though we're fighting for custody. Charlie's parents, who are his next of kin, are really too old to be looking after a baby. We always said we wanted 2 kids, and he's as sweet as pie. Jack has taken a shine to him, too. Charlie remained on life support. There was always a police officer sitting outside his room, but I visited regularly. He could sometimes communicate with his hands and eyes. Speech was usually slurred, but I know in my heart he used every fiber of energy left in his body to communicate with me on one special day. The day before he turned 28. I was reading Of Mice and Men to him. It was a book we'd studied at school and had meant a lot to us at the time, having got us both B grades on our assignments. Mid-speech, I was interrupted by his hand on my wrist. He gripped it tighter than I thought he could. I looked into his eyes, my breath frozen. They were wide, pleading. There were already several birthday cards dotted around the room, reminding him of what was about to happen. Pluh. His lips parted to try and speak. I could see tears forming in his eyes. I put the book down and leaned closer. "Charlie, what is it?" "Glenn, you have to..." I knew what he wanted to say. "Charlie, please don't ask that of me." "Please," he said. "Forever, 27. I looked around the room. It was empty, but the door was open. A cop was sitting outside like usual. I stood up and slowly closed the door. Wedging a chair under the handle, I went back to Charlie. "Are you sure?" I asked. He lifted a trembling hand to my face and nodded. "I'm sorry, brother." I started to cry as I kissed his cheek. Then I found the mains plug, pulling it out of the wall. I held his hand as he started to convulse, and alarms started sounding through the halls. The cop was knocking on the door, trying to force himself in. By the time the cop and 2 nurses had got into the room, Charlie was dead. His parents took me to court. I spent 6 months in prison before the judge dismissed the case. Charlie got his wish. He became a member of the 27 Club. I hope it's everything he wanted it to be. Story 2. The scream from the neighboring house. I had to go live alone in another state to attend college. I was lucky. My father helped me pay for the expenses of a house so I could focus on my studies. The house was wonderful, at least to me. It was a small house that consisted of a bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, living room, and my favorite part, a huge backyard where I liked to sit at night drinking tea while listening to an audiobook or some music to relax. But very strange things were happening, not in my house, but in the neighbor's house. It started on the first night I stayed there. Around 10 o'clock at night, I heard a scream of a girl from the neighbor's house. More than scaring me, I found it amusing. It wasn't a scream of pain or fear, just a girl screaming. So I imagined a girl throwing a tantrum or fighting with someone. But this scream happened every night without fail. I asked the other neighbors if they knew what it was about, but I always got different answers. Some believed it was a sound of the gate closing that sounded like a scream. Others thought the house was haunted. One of the neighbors told me that she had even called the police, worried about what might be happening to the girl. But the police, upon searching the house, saw that only a man in his 40s lived alone there. I learned to live with these screams. Supernatural or unexplainable things didn't scare me. After all, I had never experienced anything like it. Besides that, it was about 6 very quiet months, studying, listening to one or the other of those screams. But other than that, everything was normal. Things changed when I went on vacation. I didn't want to spend the holidays at my father's house, since I had to do some things in my own house, mow the lawn, buy some furniture, things that people who live alone do. However, with the holidays came boredom. The city where I lived was small. It didn't have a mall or any activities to do, so I started to obsess over the scream from the neighboring house. I began to observe the neighbor's routine, to see what time he left and returned home. I noticed that every day he left at sunset and only came back at dawn. I attributed this to some night job he might have, so I started to prepare my plan. I bought a tall ladder to jump over the wall and a mini scythe to defend myself, in case the neighbor came back and turned out to be dangerous. I was also prepared in case the police showed up. I was going to say it was because of the screams I heard, and I wanted to see if everything was okay, but I wasn't too worried. I had a good lawyer, and I would enter and leave without anyone noticing. Then the awaited night arrived. The man left his house at the same time, got into his car, and drove away. I waited about 30 minutes to make sure he wouldn't come back because he had forgotten something, and I grabbed the scythe and the ladder. I put the ladder on the wall, climbed it holding the scythe, sat on the wall, balanced the scythe on the wall, and passed the ladder to the other side so that I could climb it when I returned. The house was very well reinforced. In addition to the high walls, bars on all windows made me wonder how the hell I was going to get into the house, since I didn't have any skill in picking locks. However, to my surprise, the front door was unlocked. Who would be so stupid to have so much security and leave the door unlocked? I sarcastically asked as I entered the living room. The house was normal, furnished, but it seemed abandoned. Everything was covered in dust, as if no one who lived there used anything. I started walking through the house. Everything was extremely quiet, a tranquility that gave me chills, until it happened. The strange scream that happened every night made me alert, in fight or flight mode. I held the scythe tightly and headed to where the scream had come from. I went to the kitchen, where I saw there was a door to a basement. I tried to turn on the lights, but they didn't work, so I turned on the flashlight on my cell phone, trying to relieve the fear I was feeling. I tried to make jokes in my head, as if I were some special agent entering an investigation. As I descended, I realized that the basement was clean. It was the only part of the house without any dust. It was very strange for him to clean the basement and leave the rest of the house in that state. There was a sofa, a freezer, and a stove. But that's when it happened. I heard a strange noise coming from the ceiling. As I raised the flashlight, there she was. A girl of at least 10 years old, holding onto the corner of the ceiling in a completely inhuman position. Her eyes were as black as darkness, reflecting the flashlight with an unnatural glow. Her body was twisted in an impossible way, as if all her bones had been broken and reassembled incorrectly. She had a macabre smile, a smile that seemed more like a slit open in the darkness of her face. I froze. She moved slowly, descending the wall like a spider. Every movement made a horrible sound, like bones breaking and rearranging. Her gaze fixed on me, a gaze that pierced my soul with terrifying intensity. My muscles tensed. My heart pounded uncontrollably in my chest. Suddenly, the girl let out a sharp and inhuman scream and started running towards me at a frightening speed. I dropped the scythe and ran for the ladder, but she was faster. I felt her presence right behind me. I felt her cold and fetid breath on my neck. I ran through the living room trying to find the exit, but she caught up with me. jumping on top of me and knocking me down. She started scratching and biting me with tremendous force, her mouth opening in an impossible way, as if she were going to swallow my whole head. I screamed and fought to free myself, but she was relentless. Her nails sank into my flesh. Her bites tore my skin. Desperation took over me. I thought I was going to die there, devoured by that horrible creature. That's when the front door burst open with a bang. The neighbor rushed in and yelled at the girl to stop. She stopped suddenly, still on top of me, and looked at him with a confused expression. He said calmly, "Sweetheart, please let him go. He didn't mean to disturb you, and even though he entered uninvited, he didn't mean to harm you." The girl looked at me with completely dark eyes, as if she had no soul. The neighbor said again, "Come on, go down to your room. I'll take the boy back to his house and come back to prepare something for you to eat." The girl got off me and started to retreat to the basement, without taking her eyes off both of us. The man helped me up and took me out of that house, taking me back to mine. When we got to my house, he slapped me in the face and asked, "What the hell were you doing in my house? Were you trying to steal something?" "No," I said, still extremely nervous. I was just trying to figure out what was causing the screams every night. I was worried that something might be happening to that girl. But what the hell was that thing? What did you do to her? My neighbor sat on the couch and sighed. "I don't know who she is," he said, lighting a cigarette. "Usually, I would be very bothered by someone smoking in my house, but I was afraid to stop him. He seemed to really need that cigarette. I own several properties. I survived by renting all of them out. When I came to inspect this one next door, I found that girl in the basement. She tried to attack me, biting and scratching like she did with you. But then, she stopped and sniffed me, like a dog trying to recognize its mother. She stopped and climbed back to the corner of the wall. Scared, I left the house and called the police, but she was no longer there, thanks to her ability to move in unnatural ways. She hides from others she finds dangerous. So, I left the basement ready for her. Every day I come to be with her and give her meat. She only feeds on raw meat and spends the whole day stalking me." "How did you find me?" I asked. "I forgot to lock the door, but the house has a silent alarm. I knew you had entered as soon as the door opened." "Is there a chance that thing will come after me?" I asked, frightened. "I don't believe so. She usually never leaves the house, never followed me wherever I go, only follows me if I don't come back the next day." The man finished smoking his cigarette and prepared to leave. "I'll let it pass this time, but don't ever enter my house again," he said, heading for the exit. "And don't try to waste your time telling others what you saw. No one will believe you. I've tried." Since then, I try to spend as much time as possible away from that house. I can't leave because of the contract, and my father isn't that rich. So I stay at my college friends' houses and spend the holidays at my father's house. I never again doubted the strange things that happen in the world. The memory of that horrible creature still haunts me, and I can hardly believe I survived that terrifying encounter. Now, whenever I hear a strange noise at night, I cower in fear, wondering if she's nearby, waiting to devour me. But, despite everything, one thing is certain: I will never dare to enter that neighbor's house again. That place is full of dark secrets and unimaginable horrors, and I don't want to risk becoming another victim of that terrible creature. Story 3. Dad and I haunted down the dogman that killed my sister. I've always hated the smell of gun oil. It clings to everything it touches, soaking deep into the fibers of my clothes, the lining of my backpack, the coarse hair on the back of my hands. Yet here I am, kneeling on the cracked linoleum of our mudroom, a Remington, 308 laid across my thighs, and the stench of gun oil sharp in my nostrils. The early morning light barely scratches at the edges of the blinds, dim and grey like the belly of a dead fish. My dad Frank is in the kitchen, clattering around with the coffee pot and mumbling under his breath. Today we're heading up to the woods of northern Michigan, same as we did every year before Leah, before we lost her. I can't help but feel the old scars throbbing as I load bullets into the magazine. It's been 10 years since that hunting trip, the one that tore my family into before and after. Before, when Leah's laughter was a constant soundtrack to our lives. After, when every silence was filled with her absence. We were just kids back then. I was 10, Leah was 8. It was supposed to be a typical hunting trip, one of those bonding experiences Dad was always talking about. But things went wrong. We got separated from Dad somehow. One minute we were following him, the next we were lost, the dense woods closing in around us. Dad says when he found me, I was huddled under a fallen tree, my eyes wide, my body frozen. All I could mutter through chattering teeth was, "Dog man." It was only later, after the search parties had combed through every thicket and hollow, that they found her. What remained of Leah was barely recognizable, the evidence of a brutal mauling undeniable. The authorities concluded it was likely a bear attack. But Dad, he never accepted that explanation. He had seen the tracks, too large and oddly shaped for any bear. As I load another round, the memory flashes, unbidden and unwelcome. Large, hairy clawed hands reaching out towards us, impossibly big, grotesque in their form. Yet, the rest of the creature eludes me, a shadow just beyond the edge of my recall, leaving me with nothing but fragmented terrors and Leah's haunting, echoing screams. My mind blocked most of it out. A self-defense mechanism, I guess. For years after that day, sleep was a battleground. I'd wake up in strange places, kitchen floor, backyard, even at the edge of the nearby creek. My therapist said it was my mind's way of trying to resolve the unresolved, to wander back through the woods searching for Leah. But all I found in those sleepless nights was a deeper sense of loss. It took time, a lot of therapy, and patience I didn't know I had. But the sleepwalking did eventually stop. I guess I started to find some semblance of peace. I have mostly moved on with my life. The fragmentary memories of that day are still there, lurking in the corners of my mind. But they don't dominate my thoughts like they used to. I just finished my sophomore year at Michigan State, majoring in environmental science. As for Dad, the loss of Leah broke him. He became a shell of himself. It destroyed his marriage with Mom. He blamed himself for letting us out of his sight, for not protecting Leah. His life took on a single, consuming focus, finding the creature that killed her. He read every book, every article on cryptids and unexplained phenomena. He mapped sightings, connected dots across blurry photos and shaky testimonies of the dogman. But as the 10th anniversary of Leah's death approaches, Dad's obsession has grown more intense. He started staying up late, poring over his maps and notes, muttering to himself about patterns and cycles. He's convinced that the dogman reappears every 10 years, and this is our window of opportunity to finally hunt it down. I'm not nearly as convinced. The whole dogman thing seems like a coping mechanism, a way for Dad to channel his guilt and grief into something tangible, something he can fight against. But I decided to tag along on this trip, partly to keep an eye on him, partly because a small part of me hopes that maybe, just maybe, we'll find some kind of closure out there in the woods. I finished loading the rifle and set it aside, standing up to stretch my legs. I wiped my greasy hands on an old rag, trying to get rid of the smell. The early morning light is starting to seep into the room, casting long shadows across the floor. Dad comes out of the kitchen with 2 thermoses of coffee in hand. His eyes are bleary and tired. "You ready, Ryan?" he asks, handing me a thermos, his voice rough from too many sleepless nights. "Yeah, I'm ready," I reply, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We load our gear into the truck, the weight of our supplies and weapons a physical reminder of the burden we carry. The drive from Lansing across the Lower Peninsula is long and quiet, the silence between us filled with unspoken memories and unresolved grief. The drive north is a blur of highway lines and the dull hum of the engine. I drift off, the landscape outside blending into a haze. In my sleep, fragments of that day with Leah replay like scattered pieces of a puzzle. I see her smile, the way she tugged at my sleeve, eager to explore. The sunlight filters through the trees in sharp, jagged streaks. Then, the memory shifts, darker, disjointed. Leah's voice echoes, a playful laugh turning into a scream that pierces the air. The crunch of leaves underfoot as something heavy moves through the underbrush. I see a shadow, large and looming, not quite fitting the shapes of any creature I know. Then, something darker creeps into the dream, something I've never allowed myself to remember clearly. Before I can see what it is, I wake up with a start as the truck jerks slightly on a rough patch of road. Dad glances over. "Bad dream?" he asks. I nod, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, the remnants of the dream clinging to me like the cold. "Yeah, just thinking about Leah," I manage to say. As we drive, Dad attempts to bridge the silence with small talk. He asks about my finals, my plans for the summer, anything to keep the conversation going. His voice carries a forced cheerfulness, but it's clear his heart isn't in it. I respond when necessary, my answers brief, my gaze fixed on the passing scenery. The landscape changes as we head further north, from flat expanses to rolling hills dotted with dense patches of forest. It's beautiful country, the kind that reminds you how vast and wild Michigan can be. But today it just feels oppressive, like it's closing in on us. We finally arrive at the cabin, nestled deep in the woods, its weathered wood blending seamlessly with the surrounding trees. The place hasn't changed much since the last time I was here, a relic from another time, filled with the echoes of our past. I can still see Leah running around the porch, her laughter ringing out into the forest. Dad parks the truck, and we step out into the crisp air. The smell of pine and damp earth fills my nostrils. We start unloading our gear, the tension between us palpable. "Let's get this inside," Dad says, his voice gruff as he hefts a duffel bag onto his shoulder. I nod, grabbing my own bag and following him to the cabin. Inside, it's a mix of old and new, the same rustic furniture, but with new hunting gear and maps strewn across the table. Dad's obsession is evident in every corner of the room, a constant reminder of why we're here. As we unpack, we exchange strained attempts at normalcy. He talks about the latest cryptid sightings he's read about, his eyes lighting up with a fervor that both worries and saddens me. "Did you hear about the sighting up near Alpena?" he asks, laying out his maps on the table. "Yeah, you mentioned it," I reply, trying to muster some enthusiasm. "Do you really think there's something to it?" Dad's eyes meet mine, and for a moment, I see a flicker of doubt, but it's quickly replaced by grim determination. I have to believe it. Ryan, it's the only thing that makes sense. We finish unpacking, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing minute. I step outside to clear my head, the cool air a welcome relief. The sun is starting to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. I can't shake the feeling of unease. "You can take the upstairs room," Dad mutters. His voice is strained, trying to sound normal, but it's clear the weight of the past is heavy on him. I nod, hauling my backpack up the creaking stairs to the small bedroom that I used to share with Leah. The room feels smaller now, or maybe I've just grown too much since those innocent days. I unpack silently, setting my things aside. The bed is stiff and cold under my touch. As I settle in, I can't help but glance at the corner where Leah and I would huddle together, whispering secrets and making plans for adventures that would never happen. I push the thoughts away, focusing on the practicalities of unpacking. After settling in, I go back downstairs to find Dad loading up a backpack with supplies for our hunt. The intensity in his eyes is palpable, his hands moving with practiced precision. I know this routine. It's one he's perfected over countless solo trips since that fateful day. "We'll head out early," he says, not looking up from his task. "Gotta make the most of the daylight." I nod, though unease curls in my stomach. I'm not just worried about what we might find or not find out there. I'm worried about him. Each year, the obsession seems to carve him out a bit more, leaving less of the Dad I knew. The morning air is sharp with the scent of pine and wet earth as Dad and I head into the deeper parts of the forest. The terrain is rugged, familiar in its untamed beauty, but there's a tension between us that makes the landscape feel alien. Dad moves with a purposeful stride, his eyes scanning the woods around us. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush seems to draw his attention. He's on edge, and it puts me on edge too. As we walk, my mind drifts back to that day 10 years ago. I can almost hear Leah's voice echoing through the trees, her high-pitched call as she darted ahead. Catch me. Ryan! I remember how the sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dancing shadows on the ground. Those memories are so vivid, so tangible. It feels like I could just turn a corner and see her there, waiting for us. Dad suddenly stops and kneels, examining the ground. He points out a set of tracks that are too large for a deer, with an unusual gait pattern. It's been here. Rye, I'm telling you, it's close, he whispers, a mixture of excitement and something darker in his voice. I nod, though I'm not sure what to believe. Part of me wants to dismiss it all as grief-fueled obsession. But another part, the part that heard Leah's scream and saw something monstrous in the woods that day, isn't so sure. As we continue, Dad's comments become increasingly cryptic. You know, they say the dogman moves in cycles, drawn to certain places, certain times, like it's tied to the land itself. He muses, more to himself than to me. His fixation on the creature has always been intense, but now it borders on mania. We set up a makeshift blind near a clearing where Dad insists the creature will pass. Hours drag by with little to see but the occasional bird or distant deer. The sun rises higher in the sky, casting long, slender shadows through the dense canopy. I shift uncomfortably in my spot, the forest floor hard and unyielding beneath me. My eyes dart between the trees, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything, to break the monotony. Dad, on the other hand, remains steadfast, his gaze fixed on the tree line, as if he can will the dogman into existence by sheer force of will. A bird chirps nearby, startling me. I sigh and adjust my grip on the rifle. I glance over at Dad. Anything? I ask, more out of boredom than genuine curiosity. Not yet, he replies, his voice tight. But it's out there. I know it. I nod, even though I'm not sure I believe him. The forest seems too quiet, too still. Maybe we're chasing ghosts. As the sun begins its descent, the forest is bathed in a warm, golden light. The air cools, and a breeze rustles the leaves. I shiver, more from anticipation than the cold. The long hours of sitting and waiting are starting to wear on me. Let's call it a day for now, Dad says finally, his voice heavy with disappointment. We'll head back to the cabin, get some rest, and try again tomorrow. I stand and stretch, feeling the stiffness in my muscles. We pack up our gear in silence and start the trek back to the cabin. The walk is long and quiet. The only sounds are the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant calls of birds settling in for the night. Dinner is a quiet affair, both of us lost in our thoughts. I try to make small talk, asking Dad about his plans for tomorrow, but it feels forced. We clean up in silence. After dinner, I retreat to the small bedroom. The fatigue from the day's hike has settled into my bones, but sleep still feels like a distant hope. I lie down, staring at the ceiling, the room cloaked in darkness, save for the sliver of moonlight creeping through the window. Downstairs, I hear the faint sound of Dad moving around, likely unable to sleep himself. I drift into sleep, but it's not restful. My dreams pull me back to that fateful day in the woods. Leah's voice is clear and vibrant, her laughter echoing through the trees. She looks just as she did then, bright-eyed and full of life, her blonde hair catching the sunlight as she runs ahead of me. Come on. Right. You can't catch me, she taunts, her voice playful and teasing. I chase after her, but the scene shifts abruptly. The sky darkens, the woods around us growing dense and foreboding. Leah's laughter fades, replaced by a chilling silence. I see her ahead, standing still, her back to me. Leah? I call out, my voice trembling. She turns slowly, her eyes wide and filled with fear. Ryan, You have to remember, she says, her voice barely a whisper. It wasn't what you think. You need to know the truth. Leah's words hang in the air, cryptic and unsettling. Before I can respond, she turns and starts running again, her figure becoming a blur among the trees. Panic rises in my chest as I sprint after her, my feet pounding against the forest floor. Leah, wait! I shout, desperation lacing my voice. The forest around me seems to close in, the trees towering and twisted, shadows dancing menacingly in the dim light. I push forward, trying to keep her in sight, but she's too fast, slipping away like a wisp of smoke. Suddenly, there's a rustle, a flash of movement in the corner of my vision. Leah screams, a sound that pierces through the heavy silence. It happens too quickly. I can't see what it is, only a dark blur that snatches her up. Leah! I scream, my voice breaking. I stumble, falling to my knees as the forest spins around me. My heart races, and the terror is so real, so visceral, that it pulls me back to that awful day, the one that changed everything. I jolt awake, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I sit up, wiping the cold sweat from my forehead as I try to steady my breathing. The room is still dark. The shadows cast by the moonlight seem to flicker and dance on the walls. My heart is still racing from the nightmare, the echo of Leah's scream lingering in my ears. As I struggle to calm down, the floorboards outside my room creak. The door opens slowly, and I see the silhouette of my dad in the doorway, a Bowie knife in his hand, his posture tense. Dad, what the hell are you doing? I whisper, my voice shaking. Shh, he hisses, holding up a hand to silence me. I heard something moving around in the cabin. Stay quiet. I swallow hard, my mouth dry. I glance at the clock on the nightstand. It's just past 3 in the morning. The cabin is silent, the kind of deep, oppressive silence that makes every small sound seem louder. I can't hear anything out of the ordinary, but Dad's expression is deadly serious. He motions for me to get up, and I do, moving as quietly as I can. My heart is racing, a mix of lingering fear from the dream and the sudden, sharp anxiety of the present moment. Dad leads the way, stepping cautiously out of the bedroom and into the hallway, the knife held ready in front of him. We move through the cabin, checking each room in turn. The living room is empty, the furniture casting long shadows in the dim moonlight. The kitchen is just as we left it, the plates from dinner still drying on the counter. Everything seems normal, untouched. We finish our sweep of the cabin without finding anything amiss. The silence is heavy, punctuated only by our soft footfalls. I can see the tension in Dad's frame, his grip on the knife unwavering. After checking the last room, we pause in the dimly lit hallway, the air thick with unspoken questions. There's nothing here, I say, my voice low. Are you sure you heard something? He looks at me, his eyes searching for something in my face. I heard growling, deep and close. It was right outside the window. Maybe it was just an animal outside, a raccoon or something, I suggest, although the certainty in his voice makes me doubt my own reassurance. No, it wasn't like that. It was different, he insists, his voice tense. I nod, not wanting to argue, but the seeds of worry are planted deep. The look in his eyes sends a chill down my spine. It's not just fear, it's desperation. The kind of desperation that comes from years of chasing shadows and finding nothing. I can see the toll this hunt has taken on him, the way it's worn him down, turned him into a man I barely recognize. We head back to our rooms. As I lie down, my mind races with thoughts of my dad. I can't help but wonder if he's losing it, if the years of grief and guilt have finally pushed him over the edge. Dad wasn't always like this. Before Leah's death, he was the kind of father who took us fishing, helped with homework, and told terrible jokes that made us groan and laugh at the same time. He was solid, dependable, but losing Leah changed him. The guilt twisted him into someone I barely recognize, someone driven by a need for answers, for closure that may never come. I try to sleep, but my thoughts keep me awake. I can hear Dad moving around downstairs, probably pacing or double-checking the locks. His paranoia has become a constant presence, and I don't know how to help him. I don't even know if I can help him. The next morning, the sunlight filters weakly through the cabin windows, casting a pale light that does little to lift the heavy mood. I drag myself out of bed, feeling the exhaustion of another restless night. Dad is already up, hunched over his maps at the kitchen table, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Morning, I mumble, rubbing the sleep from my eyes as I pour myself a cup of coffee. Did you sleep at all? He shakes his head, not looking up from his notes. Not much. I couldn't stop thinking about what I heard last night. I sip my coffee, trying to shake off the remnants of my nightmare. Maybe it was just an animal. Dad, we're deep in the woods, after all. He finally looks up, his eyes intense. Ryan, I know what I heard. It wasn't just an animal. It was something else. I sigh, not wanting to argue. Okay, fine. Dad, what's the plan for today? We're going back out. I found some tracks yesterday, and I want to follow them, see where they lead. I nod, feeling a mix of apprehension and resignation. I can see how much this means to him, how desperate he is for any kind of lead. All right, let's get packed and head out. We spend the morning preparing, loading up our gear and double-checking our supplies. Dad is meticulous, going over everything with a fine-toothed comb. I try to match his focus, but my mind keeps drifting back to Leah and the dream I had. Her words echo in my head, cryptic and unsettling. You need to know the truth. We set off into the woods, the air crisp and cool. The forest is alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, but it all feels distant, like background noise to the tension between us. Dad leads the way, his eyes scanning the ground for any sign of the tracks he found yesterday. As we walk, I can't help but notice how erratically he's acting. He mutters to himself, his eyes darting around as if expecting something to jump out at us. His grip on his rifle is tight, his knuckles white. Dad, are you okay? I ask, trying to keep my voice steady. He glances at me, his expression unreadable. I'm fine, just focused. He stops frequently to examine the ground or the bark of trees, pointing out marks and signs that seem meaningless to me. Look at this, he says, crouching down to examine a broken branch. See how it snapped? That's not a deer or a bear. That's something bigger, stronger. I crouch next to Dad, squinting at the broken branch. To me, it just looks like a regular broken branch, the kind you see all over the forest. I don't know, Dad. It just looks like a branch to me, I say, trying to keep my voice neutral. Dad's eyes flicker with frustration. You're not looking close enough. It's the way it's snapped. Too clean, too deliberate. Something did this. I nod, not wanting to argue. Okay, sure. But even if you're right, it could be anything. A storm, another hunter. His expression hardens. I know what I'm looking for. This is different. I sigh, feeling the weight of the past and the tension between us pressing down on me. Dad, I had a dream last night about Leah. The words hang in the air between us, heavy and fraught with unspoken emotions. Dad's eyes widen and he straightens up, his entire demeanor shifting. What kind of dream? What did you see? His voice is urgent, almost desperate. It was strange. We were in the woods, like we are now, but everything felt different. Leah was there, running ahead of me, laughing. Then she stopped and told me I needed to know the truth, that it wasn't what I thought. Dad grabs my shoulders, his grip tight. What else did she say? Did she tell you anything specific? Anything about the creature? I shake my head, feeling a chill run down my spine. No, that was it. She just said I needed to know the truth, and then she was gone. Dad's grip on my shoulders tightens and his eyes bore into mine with a mixture of desperation and hope. Ryan, you have to try to remember. Think hard. What did the creature look like? Did you see anything else? I pull back slightly, uneasy with his intensity. Dad, I told you. I don't remember. It was just a dream. A nightmare, really. My mind's probably just mixing things up. He lets go of me and runs a hand through his hair, looking frustrated and lost. Dreams can be important. They can hold memories we've buried deep. Please, try to remember. This could be a sign, a clue. I rub my temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. I've tried, okay? I've tried for years to piece together what happened that day, but it's all just fragments, like pieces of a puzzle that don't fit. The dream, it felt real, but I don't think it's telling me anything new. Dad's face falls, and he looks older than I've ever seen him. He turns away, staring into the forest, as if it holds all the answers. As we make our way back to the cabin, the sun begins to set, casting long shadows through the trees. The air grows colder, and I shiver, pulling my jacket tighter around me. Dad is silent, lost in his thoughts, his face drawn and haggard. Back at the cabin, we unload our gear once again in silence. Dad disappears into his room, muttering something about going over his notes. I decide to explore the cabin, hoping to find something that might help me understand what's going on with him. In the attic, I find a box of old family photos and documents. As I sift through the contents, I come across a worn journal with Dad's handwriting on the cover. Curiosity gets the better of me, and I open it, flipping through the pages. The journal is filled with notes and sketches, detailing his obsession with the dogman. But there's something else. Entries that talk about Leah, about that day in the woods. His handwriting becomes more erratic, the words harder to read. One entry stands out, dated just a few days after Leah's death. June 15th, 2013. It was supposed to be a normal trip. Keep them close, Frank, I kept telling myself. But I failed. Leah is gone, and it's my fault. I heard her scream, saw the shadows. I tried to get to her, but the thing, it was there, too fast, too strong. My hands, blood everywhere. No one will believe me. I can't even believe myself. I have to find it. I have to protect Ryan. I have to make it right. God, what have I done? Before I can read further, the attic door creaks open and Dad's voice slices through the stillness. What are you doing up here? His tone is sharp, almost panicked. I turn to see him standing in the doorway, his face pale and his eyes wide with something between anger and fear. I clutch the journal to my chest, my mind racing. I found this. I was just trying to understand. In an instant, he crosses the room and snatches the journal from my hands. His grip is tight, his knuckles white. You had no right, he growls, his voice trembling. Dad, I just wanted to know the truth, I shout, frustration boiling over. What really happened to Leah? His eyes flash with a mix of rage and anguish, and before I can react, he slaps me across the face. The force of it knocks me off balance and I stumble backward, my cheek stinging. For a moment, there's a stunned silence. We both stand there, breathing hard, the air thick with tension. I'm sorry, Dad says finally, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean to. He trails off, clutching the journal to his chest like a lifeline. I touch my cheek, feeling the heat from the slap, and take a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Dad, what aren't you telling me? What really happened that day? Stay out of it, Ryan, Dad growls, his eyes dark with anger. You don't know what you're messing with. He turns and storms out of the attic. I'm left standing there, my cheek throbbing, my mind racing. What the fuck is going on? What really happened to Leah? And what is Dad so afraid of? That night, I sleep with my rifle within arm's reach, more afraid of my dad than any dog man. The slap still burns on my cheek, and the look in his eyes, rage, fear, something darker, haunts me. I lie awake, listening to the creaks and groans of the old cabin, every sound amplified in the stillness. Eventually, exhaustion pulls me under, and I fall into a restless sleep. The dream returns, vivid and unsettling. I'm back in the woods, chasing after Leah. Her laughter echoes through the trees, a haunting reminder of happier times. This time, though, I push myself harder, refusing to let her slip away. "Ryan, catch me," she calls, her voice playful. "I'm coming, Leah," I shout, my legs pumping, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest around us is a twisted, shadowy maze, the trees seeming to close in on us. Leah's figure becomes clearer, her blonde hair catching the dim light filtering through the canopy. She stops suddenly, turning to face me, her eyes wide with fear. "Leah, what is it?" I ask, my voice trembling. "Look behind you," she whispers, her voice barely audible. I turn slowly, dread creeping up my spine. In the shadows, I see a figure, its form indistinct and shifting. It's not quite animal, not quite human, something in between. The sight of it sends a jolt of terror through me, and I wake up with a start, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I'm not in my bed. The ground beneath me is cold and hard, the smell of damp earth filling my nostrils. Panic rises as I realize I've sleepwalked into the woods. I scramble to my feet, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The moon casts a pale glow over the surroundings, revealing what looks like a long-abandoned animal lair. The walls are covered in giant claw marks, deep gouges in the wood and earth. The air is heavy with the scent of decay, and a chill runs through me. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Carefully, I start to move, my eyes scanning the ground, desperate for a familiar landmark. That's when I see them, faded scraps of fabric caught on the jagged edges of the underbrush. My steps falter, a sense of dread washing over me as I bend down to examine them. The fabric is torn, weathered by time and the elements, but unmistakably familiar. It's part of Leah's jacket, the bright pink one she wore on the day she disappeared. As I strain to make sense of it all, a rustling sound behind me snaps my focus. My heart leaps into my throat. I spin around, my hand instinctively reaching for the rifle I don't have, because of course, I didn't bring it in my unconscious state. The shadowy figure that emerges from the trees is unsettlingly familiar, mirroring the menacing forms of my nightmares. But as it steps into the moonlight, I recognize the worn jacket, the weary posture. It's Dad. "Ryan!" he calls out, his voice a mix of relief and stern concern. "I've been looking everywhere for you. What the hell are you doing out here?" I exhale slowly, the terror ebbing away as reality sets back in. I don't know, Dad. I must have sleepwalked again." My voice is shaky, my earlier dream still clinging to the edges of my consciousness. Dad stares at me in disbelief. "You haven't sleepwalked since you were a kid, Rye. This isn't just a coincidence." Dad stares at me in disbelief. "You haven't sleepwalked since you were a kid, Rye. This isn't just a coincidence." His eyes dart around, taking in the surroundings, the eerie, claw-marked den, the unsettling quiet of the woods. "How did you even find this place?" I shake my head, struggling to find an answer. "I don't know, Dad. I woke up here." The uncertainty in my voice does nothing to ease the tension. His eyes lock onto the tattered remains of Leah's jacket in my hands, and something inside him snaps. The color drains from his face as he stumbles a few steps backward. This is where it happened," he murmurs, his voice barely a whisper. "This is where we found Leah." "I thought you said you don't remember anything from that night," he says accusingly. "I swear, Dad, I don't know anything about this place." I insist, my own heart pounding. "It was you, wasn't it? You've been hiding this from me." His voice is frantic. "You, last night, the growling, it was you." His voice rises, tinged with hysteria. I step back, my pulse racing. feeling the chill of the night and the weight of his accusation. "Dad, I don't know what you're talking about." "No," he interrupts, his voice breaking as he points a trembling finger at me. "You knew. You always knew. It was you, Ryan, all these years. The evidence was right there, but I refused to see it. You were the dogman."
You killed Leah!
His words hit me like a physical blow, absurd and horrifying in their implications. "Dad, you're not making any sense. You're talking crazy." "I was just a little kid. How could I protest, my voice shaky. He steps closer, his presence looming over me, the outline of his figure distorted by the shadows of the trees. "Think about it. It all makes sense now. You led us here, to this place, because you remember, because you did it. Dad, stop it," I shout, my heart pounding in my chest. "You're scaring me. You need help, professional help. This isn't you." But he's beyond reason, his eyes wild with a haunted grief. "I have to end this," he mutters, more to himself than to me, his hand tightening around his rifle. His finger hovers dangerously over the trigger of his rifle. My instincts kick in, and I know I have to act fast. I lunge toward him, trying to knock the weapon away, but he's quicker than I expected. We struggle, our breaths heavy in the cold night air, the sounds of our scuffle the only noise in the otherwise silent woods. His strength surprises me, fueled by his frantic emotions. He shoves me back, and I stumble over a root, my balance lost for a crucial second. That's all he needs. He raises his rifle, his intentions clear in his wild, pained eyes. I dive to the ground just as the shot rings out, a deafening blast that echoes ominously through the trees. The bullet whizzes past, narrowly missing me, embedding itself in the bark of an old pine. I scramble to my feet, my heart pounding in my ears, and I start running. The underbrush claws at my clothes and skin, but I push through, driven by a primal urge to survive. "Dad, stop. It's me. Ryan!" I shout back as I dodge between the trees. Another shot breaks the silence, closer this time, sending splinters of wood flying from a nearby tree trunk. It's surreal, being hunted by my own father, a man tormented by grief and lost in his delusions. I don't stop to look back. I can hear him crashing through the forest behind me, his heavy breaths and muttered curses carried on the wind. The terrain is rough, and I'm fueled by adrenaline, but exhaustion is setting in. I need a plan. Ahead, I see a rocky outcrop and make a split-second decision to head for it. It offers a chance to hide, to catch my breath and maybe reason with him if he catches up. As I reach the rocks, I slip behind the largest one, my body pressed tight against the cold, damp surface. I hear his footsteps approaching, slow and cautious now. As I press against the rock, trying to calm my racing heart, I can hear Dad's footsteps drawing closer, each step crunching ominously on the forest floor. He's methodical, deliberate, like a hunter stalking his prey. "Come out." "Ryan!" Dad's voice is ragged, filled with a blend of fury and pain. My heart pounds against my chest, the cold sweat on my back making me shiver against the rough surface of the rock. I know I can't just sit here. It's only a matter of time before he finds me. Taking a deep breath, I peek around the edge of the rock, trying to gauge his position. I see him, rifle raised, scanning the area slowly. This might be my only chance to end this madness without further violence. I need to disarm him, to talk some sense into him if I can, as quietly as I can. I move out from behind the rock, my steps careful to avoid any twigs or leaves that might betray my position. I'm almost upon him when a branch snaps under my foot, a sound so trivial yet so alarmingly loud in the quiet of the woods. Dad whirls around, looking completely unhinged. "Ryan!" he exclaims, his rifle swinging in my direction. Panic overtakes me, and I lunge forward, my hands reaching for the gun. We struggle, the rifle between us, our breaths heavy and erratic. "Dad, please, stop," I plead, trying to wrestle the gun away, but he's strong, stronger than I expected. In the chaos, the rifle goes off. The sound is deafening, a sharp echo that seems to reverberate off every tree around us. Pain explodes in my abdomen, sharp and burning, like nothing I've ever felt before. I stagger back, my hands instinctively going to the wound. The warmth of my own blood coats my fingers, stark and terrifying. Dad drops the rifle, his eyes wide with horror. "Oh my God, what have I done?" he gasps, rushing to my side as I collapse onto the forest floor. As the pain sears through me, a strange, overpowering energy surges within. It's wild, primal, unlike anything I've ever experienced. Looking down in horror, my hands are no longer hands but large, hairy, clawed appendages. The transformation is rapid, consuming. My vision blurs, senses heighten, and a raw, guttural growl builds in my throat. In that moment, a flood of understanding washes over me, mingling with the horror of realization. These are the hands of the creature from my nightmares. The creature whose face I can never fully recall because, as I now understand, it is me. What happens next feels detached, as if I'm no longer in control of my own actions, watching from a distance as my body moves on its own. I turn towards my dad, his face a mask of terror. He stumbles back, his eyes wide with the dawning realization of what his son has become. The forest around us seems to fall silent, holding its breath as the nightmarish scene unfolds. I can hear my own growls, guttural and deep, filling the air with a sound that's both foreign and intimately familiar. The pain in my abdomen fuels a dark, violent urge, an urge that's too strong to resist. With a ferocity that feels both alien and intrinsic, I move towards him. My dad, paralyzed by fear and shock, doesn't run. Maybe he can't. Maybe he doesn't want to. The encounter is brutal and swift, a blur of motion and violence. My dad barely puts up a struggle, as though resigned to his fate. Not that there is anything he can do. The creature that I've become is too powerful, too consumed by the wild instincts surging through me. I tear him apart, limb from bloody limb. My hands, no, my claws, rending through fabric and flesh with disgusting ease. The sound of my dad's screams, of tearing fabric and flesh, is drowned out by the animalistic growls that echo through the trees. When it's all over, the red mist that had clouded my vision begins to fade, and the fierce, uncontrollable rage that drove my actions subsides. I'm left standing, my breaths heavy and erratic, in the eerie stillness of the forest. The transformation reverses as quickly as it came on, and I find myself back in my human form. My clothes are ripped to shreds, hanging off my frame in tattered remnants. At my feet lies what's left of my dad, his body torn and unrecognizable. I glance down at my abdomen, expecting agony, but instead find my wound miraculously healed. No sign of the gunshot remains, just a faint scar where I expected a bloody mess. Shock sets in, a numbing disbelief mixed with a gut-wrenching realization of what I've become and what I've done. My hands, now human, tremble as I look at them, half expecting to see the claws that had so effortlessly ripped through flesh and bone. But there's only blood, my father's blood against my skin. I stand there for what feels like an eternity, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. Eventually, the shock wears thin, and a cold practicality takes hold. I need to get out of here. I need to cover my tracks, to disappear, because who would believe this? Who would understand that I didn't choose this? That I'm not a monster by choice? With trembling hands, I do what's necessary. I bury my dad in a shallow grave. The physical act of digging strangely grounding. I cover him with leaves and branches, a pitiful attempt to hide the brutality of his end. I take a moment, whispering apologies into the wind, knowing full well that nothing I say can change what happened. I leave the forest behind, my mind a whirl of dark thoughts. As I walk, the first hints of dawn brush against the horizon, the sky bleeding a soft pink. It's hauntingly beautiful. Story 4. Mutant encounters and mysterious rules. There were 3 of us heading into the dark Eastern European forests. My friend Dmitri, who was originally from the country and knew the language, his girlfriend Anna and myself. Everything seemed mundane enough as we flew into the country and handed over our passports. There was no sign of the horrors waiting ahead. The first towns we encountered looked idyllic enough as we drove through them in a rental car. Isolated farmhouses with cows and chickens dotted the landscape. Plentiful fields of wheat, potatoes and corn stretched out on all sides of us. The black earth here was fertile, I knew, as we headed deeper into the radiation zone. However, the houses and farms all started to look abandoned and dilapidated, the fields barren and dead. Christ on a cracker, I muttered, more to myself than to my friends. This place looks like it suffered through the apocalypse. It did, Dimitri said grimly. A nuclear apocalypse. I feel like the biblical one is far more optimistic than the true apocalypse will be. In reality, there will be no rapture, no victory of light over darkness. If there is ever a World War III, every major city will be consumed by nuclear fire. It will throw buses and cars thousands of feet into the air, spilling out bodies onto the burning skies. Entire streets will collapse, trapping countless millions under the rubble. That's a cheerful thought, Anna commented, her dark blue eyes staring out the window. I saw the reflection of white eyes skittering through the brush outside, small animals that disappeared in front of the approaching roar of the engine. How far is it? I asked, feeling carsick and anxious. The winding roads here curved through countless hills. It reminded me of driving through parts of Northern California before, when I had retched out the window. Anna and Dimitri seemed unaffected, though I cursed my stomach, which was always turning traitorous towards me. It's a while. Man, Dimitri said, this country is huge. Probably another 3 or 4 hour drive, and then we have to start walking. Good thing we left before dawn, Anna said, stifling a yawn. She had a can of some cheap Russian Red Bull knockoff, some fluorescent green crap that smelled like chemicals, but she drank it as if it were the finest French wine. I gazed out at the dark forests that passed us on both sides, wondering what kind of sights lay ahead in this land of the damned. The sun rose early over the gently rolling hills and black earth of Ukraine, sending its rusty streaks of blood across the sky. The going had been easy so far, except for the constant car sickness I felt. I took a few pills of meclizine, wishing that I could have smuggled some weed gummies through customs. But here, cannabis was illegal, and I was not eager to see the inside of an Eastern European prison, where lunatics like the 3 guys, 1 hammer maniacs and the chessboard killer lived in hellish conditions. Holy shit. Would you look at that? Dimitri said with awe and wonder oozing from his voice as the car braked abruptly. I looked up quickly, my stomach doing flips, but what I saw laying across the road instantly brought me back to the moment. Dimitri pointed a tattooed hand at the sight. Is that real? Anna asked. I could only shake my head as we all stared at the dead bear that was laying across the cracked road, its dead eyes staring straight through us. I noticed immediately that the bear had extra paws on its arms. Blood-stained claws jutted sharply out of its 4 paws, each seeming to have 7 fingers. Its feet looked stunted and twisted, like the roots of a tree. An extra arm stuck out of the front of its chest, a pale, white fleshy growth emerging from its sternum. The mutated limb looked malformed and boneless, causing a sense of revulsion to rise up as I gazed on it. It flopped gently in the heavy wind that swirled down the surrounding hills. Well, I guess the rumors are true, Dimitri said slowly, his eyes as wide and excited as a child. Can you imagine what other kinds of things must be lurking in these forests? This is going to make a really awesome documentary, Anna nodded, playing with a small, handheld digital camera she took everywhere with her. She wanted to make a video that would finally go viral on the internet and help her gain some recognition for her work. I'm going to record everything, including this, she said excitedly, brushing a lock of blonde hair behind her ear as she opened the door of the car. Dawn had risen overhead, radiating the first warm rays of a bright summer day. After a long moment, I followed her out. Dimitri stood at her side, his dark eyes wide. He ran a trembling hand over his shaved head as he looked down at the enormous bear. Anna zoomed in with the camera, kneeling down before the still beast. Her finely formed fingers shook with excitement as she drew within inches of the corpse. I wondered how the bear had died, as I didn't see any signs of injuries on the creature's body. The next moment, I saw it blink. I backpedaled away, giving a hoarse, guttural shout of warning. Anna was busy staring at the screen of the digital camera, scanning it across the bear's extra fingers and limbs, but the panic that swept over Dimitri's face showed me that he, too, had seen it. He grabbed Anna's arm, dragging her back with sudden fury. She stumbled, her legs crossing under her. She crashed into him, and they fell back together. A moment later, the bear came to life, its bones cracking as it twisted its head to look at the three of us. It swiped a mutated paw at the place where Anna's face had been only a moment before. I heard the sharp claws slice through the air like switchblades. The bear's head ratcheted over to glare at us. It gnashed its teeth as silver streams of saliva flew from its shaking head. With a primal roar, it leapt off the ground. I turned to run back to the safety of the car, but I nearly tripped when a pale figure streaked out of the forest right in front of me. It looked like something conjured up in a nightmare. It was naked and bloated, its skin white with bulging, pink cheeks. It looked to have a combination of human and pig features, and yet it ran upright like a person. Its irises were blood red, its pupils huge and excited. Its beady eyes flicked over to Anna, and a low, satisfied growl erupted from its wide throat. I watched the muscles work furiously in its porcine body as it sprinted towards her. Before either Dimitri or I could react, the pig thing grabbed Anna around the neck, its sharp, black fingers digging deeply into her skin. She squealed like a strangled rabbit as it dragged her away into the dark Ukrainian forests. Its pink lips pulled back in an excited grimace, revealing the sharp fangs underneath. I heard its guttural growls fade away rapidly. It sprinted much faster than a person, its hooves slamming the ground over and over at a superhuman speed. "Hey!" Dimitri called excitedly, taking a step forward. "What do you—" A giant bear paw with too many gleaming claws smacked his leg out from under him, sending him flying. I only stood there, shell-shocked and amazed, as Anna disappeared into the trees. A single moment later, the bear rose to its full height, roaring at us. Streams of spit flew from its mouth as its rancid breath washed over us. Breath that emanated a smell like roadkill and infection. I put my hands up, flinching, expecting a blow that never came. When I looked up, the bear had gone back on all fours. It ran in the path the pig creature had gone, its white, boneless extra limb hanging limply from its chest. "What the fuck?" Dimitri cried on the ground, rocking back and forth. I came back to life, running over to his side. I saw deep gouge marks sliced through his blue jeans. Bright streams of blood lazily dripped from the claw marks on his left leg. "We need to get help," I cried, shaking him. His eyes looked far away and confused, as if he didn't fully realize what was happening. "We need to go back and get the police." "The police?" he asked, laughing. "The police here won't do anything. You think they're going to travel out into the radioactivity zone just for a missing person?" He shook his head grimly before reaching out a hand to me. "Help me up. There's a first aid kit in the car. We need to bandage this up. Then we're going after Anna." We had no way to call for help. The phones this far out in Chernobyl didn't work, and there were never any cell phone towers built in the silent land. After Dimitri had disinfected and bandaged his legs, he rummaged through the trunk, looking for weapons. "God damn, there's nothing good here," he said despondently. "Some bear mace, some knives. What good is any of that going to do against these mutated monsters? We need an AK-47. I nodded in agreement. "Too bad we're not in the US," I said. "The only guns you're going to get around here are the ones you take off the bodies of Russian soldiers." "Yeah, if only," he muttered sadly, handing me a large folding knife. "We have one canister of bear mace, 3 knives and a tire iron. Not exactly an arsenal. I really didn't want to go into those dark woods, but thinking of Anna being tortured or murdered made me feel sick and weak. I shook my head, mentally torn. Here, take the bear mace. 2, I'll take the tire iron and a knife, he continued, forcing the black canister into my numb fingers. You ready for this? Absolutely not, I said. I think we should try to find help. If we both go out there and get slaughtered, no one will ever find Anna. The nearest town is 2 hours west of here, he responded icily. By the time we get help, her trail will have gone cold. It will take at least 5 or 6 hours to get any rescue out here. No, we need to do this, and we need to do it now. If you don't want to come, I'll come, I said grimly, my heart pounding. Fuck it. Dmitri had a sad history. As a child living in Ukraine, he had been kidnapped by an insane neighbor and kept in a dirt pit outside for weeks, wallowing in his own piss and shit, slowly starving. He said the man would throw down a stale crust of bread or a rice cake into the mud and human waste every few days. Dmitri would pull the food out, wipe off the feces and eat it. I shuddered, remembering the horror stories he had told me. I knew he had a personal reason for making sure Anna was not subjected to the same endless suffering, even if it meant his own death. The bear and the pig creature had left a clear trail of broken brush and snapped twigs snaking through the forest. Side by side, we moved cautiously ahead, constantly checking our backs, but we saw no signs of movement and heard nothing. Up ahead, the trees abruptly opened up, letting golden sunlight stream down. Blinking quickly, we left the forest behind. We walked out into a field in the middle of a valley surrounded by tall, dark hills. Grass and weeds rippled in waves as the wind swept past us. Formed in a semicircle in front of us, human skeletons lay endlessly dreaming. They stared up into the vast blue sky with grinning skulls and empty sockets. Some still had putrefying strips of flesh and ligaments clinging to the bones. Animals had scattered some of the bodies, but others lay complete, like corpses in a tomb. Human skulls, leg bones and arm bones lay scattered haphazardly across the field, their surfaces yellowed and cracked with age. It looked like a bone orchard. What are we looking at right now? I whispered, furtively glancing around at the field of bones. An insane part of my mind wondered if they might rise from the dead and come after us. Compared to what we had already seen in this place of nightmares, it didn't seem that far-fetched. Dead bodies, Dmitri said grimly. Victims of the nuclear accident. I asked. He shook his head, pointing at some of the fresher corpses nearby. Their throats looked like they had been ripped out, the bones of their necks showing deep bite marks. The one nearest us had its skeletal fingers wrapped around a glass bottle with a piece of paper rolled inside and a cork inserted into the top. I knelt down, prying the fingers back with soft, cracking noises. I uncorked it and took out the paper. It felt thick in my hands, like some kind of handcrafted paper from the old days. The cursive flowing across the sheet looked like it had been written in a quill pen with actual ink. In confusion, I read the letter aloud. Rules to survive in the Hellskin Nature Preserve. 1. The cult known as the Golden Butchers has been kidnapping women to breed them with the pig creatures. They worship the offspring that result from these unions as gods. If a member of your group gets taken, we will find them in the living farm at the end of the forest. 2. If you encounter Mr. Welcome, the enormous pig god with the eyes on his forehead, you must not let him touch you. 3. The red snakes can only see while you're moving. If you encounter them, stay still. Don't even breathe. Breeding women with pig creatures? Dmitri cried, horror washing over his face. We need to find her, but where do we even start? I looked through the field, trying to see any sign of tracks, but it looked like hundreds of animals had gone through this field recently. Paths of tall, crushed grass crisscrossed the enormous length of it, some of them worn down to black dirt and stones. I just shook my head, having no idea. A distant scream rolled its way down the surrounding hills. It came from our left and sounded very much like Anna. Dimitri's eyes turned cold. Without looking back at me, he started frantically running towards the sound. It faded away within seconds. "Wait up!" I cried, sprinting as fast as I could. His freshly shaved head gleamed as he disappeared into the trees. Gripping the open buck knife in my hand, my knuckles white with tension and fear, I followed after him. We wandered for hours through the woods, never hearing a second scream to guide our path. We both hoped that we were going in the right direction. A small deer trail winding through the brush opened up, heading up rocky hills and clear streams of water. Sweating and nervous, we traveled for miles and miles, rarely talking. A few times, I tried to get Dimitri to slow down. "How do you know you're going in the right direction?" I asked. "We've been walking this trail for 5 hours and haven't seen a thing." This was the direction the scream came from, he said weakly. Where else would they go? They would want to travel quickly with a hostage. They would take a trail. I didn't point out that there may be other trails, that we had absolutely no idea where we were going. As we reached the peak of a mountain, I pulled a small, portable Geiger counter we had taken along for the trip. The radioactivity here was high, much higher than normal background radiation. I didn't know how far we were from the nuclear power plant at the center of all this, but at a certain point, it would become too dangerous to keep moving forward. Dimitri was next to me, chugging a bottle of water when a shriek rang out below us. It sounded almost animalistic, but had a strange, electronic distortion, amplified to an ear-splitting cacophony. It echoed through the trees. Much quieter roars answered from the forests all around us in response. The cries of bears and other predators, these sounded much closer. However, psst, a pile of thick ferns said to my left, shaking suddenly. In Ukrainian, the ferns continued by whispering, "Hey, you!" I jumped, swinging the knife in the direction of the brush, watching the blade shake wildly in my hand as fresh waves of adrenaline surged through my body. Dimitri was by my side, his eyes wide and wild. He glanced over at me, nodding. He had the tire iron raised like a tennis racket, ready to strike. A moment later, a little boy crawled out. He was scarecrow thin, his face smudged with dirt and filth, his dark eyes sunken and lifeless deep inside his small head. He had black hair and a nose like a little twisted lump in the center of his face. It seemed like it had been repeatedly broken. He didn't look older than 10, but he looked so emaciated that it was impossible to say. The rags and tatters he wore barely covered his body, and the boy was almost in his Genesis suit. "Come out," I said grimly. Dimitri's eyes bulged from his head. "Don't kill me." "Please," the boy whispered in a cracked, choked voice, his accent giving all his words a guttural tone. "Take me out of here. My mom and dad brought me here. They were part of the Golden Butchers, but a couple months ago, they got sick and died from all the poison in the water and food." "Who are you?" "Kid," Dimitri said, reaching down and pulling him up to his feet. I watched the boy closely, the bear mace in one hand and the knife in the other, looking for any sign of sudden violence or betrayal. "My name is Philip. I come from the farm," he said, pointing vaguely towards the tallest peak in the area. "You can't see it from here, but it's over there." Dimitri kneeled down until he was eye to eye with Philip. "Can you take us there?" he said. Philip's eyes teared up, but he slowly nodded. "If you will take me with you when you leave, I'll show you," he said, crying now. "But it is a horrible place. It is the place of Mr. Welcome." Philip guided us to the living farm, saving us a great deal of time. He navigated the forest like an experienced hiker, seeming to know the entire area from the smallest clues, a split, fallen tree, or a tree with a whirl like an eye, or a sudden curve in a babbling brook. It saved us a great deal of time wandering through the woods, where everything looked exactly the same to me. "There," he said, pointing through a break in the trees to the farm. The entire top of the hill was cleared of trees and brush. In its place stood a nightmare. The farm was the closest place to hell I've ever seen. The top of the living building peeked over the tall trees surrounding it. It had something like a bell tower on the top of it, almost like a church might have. But instead of a bell, it had an enormous, bloodshot eye. The eye had an iris as red as a dismembered heart. Its pupil was dilated and insane. From here, the eye looked to be about the size of a church bell and had no eyelids. Strange white filaments like those of a slime mold surrounded it, trailing down into the building. I wondered if this was the optic nerve for the great, staring eye. The rest of the building was as black as eternity, windowless and imposing. It had a brutalist architecture, all sharp angles and steep slopes. I watched the building and the eye closely. To my horror, I realized that the entire thing was alive somehow. The eye constantly spun in its place, staring out over the surrounding hills like the eye of Sauron. The building constantly breathed. "Welcome," a hushed, distorted voice cried. The words seemed to come from the breathing and living walls of the farm itself. "Welcome. Welcome. What the fuck is this, kid?" Dmitri whispered hoarsely. "Where's Anna?" Philip shook his head sadly. "She's inside with the other breeders," he said, the fear and terror evident on his face. "They keep them chained in cages or bound in the basement until the time for the ritual comes." "And when is that?" I asked. He looked up at the sky and the fading light. We had somehow wasted nearly an entire day already. Night was coming, and we hadn't even seen Anna yet. "At sunset," he responded. Dmitri nearly jumped up at that. "Sunset? That's almost here! We need to go now!" he cried. I almost wanted to laugh. "What are you going to do? Stab that enormous building with your knife?" I whispered. "We need a plan. Maybe we can burn it down, or..." But my words were cut off by the roaring of the building. Its scream echoed over the hills. It was immediately answered by countless others, including one that came only a few dozen feet behind us. I grabbed Dmitri's shoulder, my panicked eyes flicking in that direction. "There's something," I started to say when the brush cracked under a heavy weight. Looking up, I saw something horrible stalking us from behind. It looked like a pig, walking on all fours with a fat, bloated body, but it was the size of an SUV. Its eyes were like the eye in the building, blood red and dilated. All over its body, hundreds of sharp teeth grew out of its skin, covering the pink flesh like tumors. The creature almost looked like a porcupine with all the sharp points of fangs projecting from its body. For a moment, its eyes widened as we stared at each other. They instantly narrowed as the pig roared again and gave chase. It gnashed its teeth, opening and closing its mouth in a frenzy of bloodlust. In its mouth, too, the teeth grew wild. Hundreds of razor-sharp teeth of different sizes grew from its gums, tongue and lips. "Run!" I cried, grabbing Philip's arm and hauling him off the ground. The boy had a natural survivor's instincts and immediately started running by my side, away from the approaching creature. We broke out into the massive clearing where the living farm stood. I saw that the building had only a single door in and out, a black barn door that stood wide open. I heard Dmitri's feet pounding the ground behind me. The heavy thuds of the approaching creature drew louder by the second. "In the barn!" I cried, not having time to think. It was the only possible place of safety here. I sprinted faster than I ever had before towards those doors, as if they were entrance to paradise itself. Without slowing, I ran into the building, trying to slam one of the doors shut behind me. Dmitri grabbed the other. With the creature only seconds away, they started swinging shut. Philip's small body pressed against my leg as he came forward, using his meager strength to help me. The door was extremely heavy and hard to move. The building itself looked like it was 6 or 7 stories tall, and the doors to the barn nearly a third of that height. With a tortured creak, they slammed shut. A single breath later, something heavy thudded against the other sides, as if it had been hit by a battering ram. But the door held. Quickly, Dmitri and I grabbed a large board leaning against the wall and stuffed it into the brackets on both sides of the door, locking it from the inside. I noticed how cool and dark it was in here, as if I had walked into a cave. I turned, taking in the interior of the living farm for the first time. At that moment, I had to repress a scream welling up in my throat. Hundreds of imprisoned women both lined both sides of the barn. They were stacked one on top of another like prison cells, wearing filthy, blood-stained rags. Most of them looked silently down on us with dead, haunted eyes. I noticed the majority were in their 20s or 30s, but their eyes looked centuries old. Along the back wall, an enormous pig lined the wall, positioned like Jesus on the cross. It stood as tall as the barn itself. Extra eyes covered its face, a dozen of them positioned all over its cheeks and forehead, from the top of its head. I saw white filaments rising up into the bell tower, its many blood-red eyes focused on us, as still as death. "Welcome," it hissed. "Welcome." Its limbs were chained to the wall, enormous rusted links intertwined around its body, preventing Mr. Welcome from moving. "Anna," Dmitri cried. Looking around frantically, there was no one else here that I could see except for Mr. Welcome and all the hostages. "Anna, where are you?" "Don't scream," Philip said in a tiny, fear-choked voice. "Please, don't scream." But it was too late, as Dmitri's last words faded. Trapdoors built into the black floor of the barn sprung open. Dozens of mutated bears and pig creatures crept out, their predatory eyes scanning us with hunger and anger. "Fuck," Dmitri cried, running back to the door at my side. Frantically, the three of us pulled the board up and dropped it to the fleshy floor with a clatter, as hisses and growls erupted all around us, and the predators creeped forwards towards us in a semicircle. The barn door flew open. It was night now, the darkness creeping in like a descending curtain. No pig creatures awaited us on the other side, but something worse seemed to be creeping out of the forest. I saw snakes the color of clotted blood slithering ahead. Each one was the size of a tractor trailer, yet they made very little noise. An occasional hiss would rip its way through the air, but they hunted silently. As I stood in the field in front of the barn, a no-man's land of hellish proportions, the certainty of death fell over my heart like grasping skeletal hands. I looked down at the little boy sadly. He gave me a faint smile, even though his eyes were terrified. "I think we're fucked," Dmitri whispered by my side. I only nodded. But at that moment, I remembered the rules, and an idea came to me. "Just stay still," I said. "Don't even breathe." Philip and Dmitri looked at me strangely. Then recognition came over their eyes. Dmitri only nodded, and then we all played statue. The predators from the barn were only 30 feet behind us by now, crouched down and hunting us like a cat with a mouse. Yet the snakes also closed in, their black, slitted eyes gleaming with a reptilian coldness, as the mutated bears and pig creatures leaned down to pounce. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. I felt a sudden rush of air all around me. The snakes flitted forward in a blur, their massive jaws unhinging. Two fangs swiveled out like switchblades, fangs big enough to impale a police car. Drops of clear venom fell lazily from the ends. Keeping my eyes closed, afraid to even breathe or blink, I listened as the sounds of tearing flesh and screaming animals resonated all around me. After about 30 seconds of this, everything went deathly silent. I don't know how long we stood there like statues, but eventually, someone touched my shoulder. I opened my eyes, unbelieving. Dmitri stared at me intently. "They're all gone," he whispered. "All except Mr. Welcome. It's now or never." I nodded, and together, we moved into the farm. The trapdoors still lay open. I could hear very faint sobbing coming from under the building. Dmitri was afraid to make a sound. Together, the three of us went down to investigate. We found a dark basement covered in hay. Torture tools covered the walls. Iron maidens, brazen bulls, crosses, and an entire universe of whips, saws, grinders, pliers, razor wire, and other blood-stained tools of the trade. In the corner, we saw Anna, her hands tied to the wall. More rope bound her feet and legs. We ran forward. When Anna saw Dmitri, she collapsed into a nervous wreck. "Oh my God, you came. Please, get me out of here. Right now," she whispered. "They're coming. The ritual will start soon." Without a word, we started cutting the ropes, freeing her quickly. "We need to be as quiet as possible," I told Anna. "We can all get out of here. Let's go." As we ascended from the basement back to the main floor of the living farm, the repetitive, metallic voice of Mr. Welcome kept repeating the same insane mantra. "Welcome," it said. "Welcome," once the four of us were all together. However, it changed. "Welcome, thieves," it hissed, its voice deepening and turning into a demonic gurgle. "That is my breeder. You will have to find out what happens to thieves." I could only imagine all those blood-stained tools in the basement, and I shuddered. Mr. Welcome inhaled deeply, his massive, fleshy body ballooning. With a predatory roar, he ripped the chains out of the wall of the living building. Orange pus and dark, clotted blood dripped from the holes. The barn breathed faster and deeper, the broken walls vibrating and shimmering as new life and pain flowed into them. Mr. Welcome started moving towards us like a grinding juggernaut, walking on two legs like some sort of pig god. His many lidless eyes never looked away from us. The frayed optic nerves leading to the bell tower broke with a sound like snapping rubber bands. Dmitri looked at me with great sadness in his eyes. "Get away," he whispered. "I'll distract it. Just get Anna home, no matter what." Before I could respond, he ran forwards towards the abomination, the small, useless knife raised in one hand. Mr. Welcome saw him coming. He tried to swipe at Dmitri with a sharp, black hoof, but Dmitri ducked. Running around the back of him, he gave a battle cry and started stabbing the monster in the back of the leg, which probably hurt it about as much as a toothpick. But it provided a distraction. This time, Mr. Welcome spun his whole body, falling back to all four legs to deal with this nuisance. He used his massive snout to smack Dmitri hard, sending him flying across the barn. He hit the wall with a bone-shattering thud. Dmitri's skin immediately started to blacken, as if he were being burned alive. His eyes melted out of his face as he screamed, clawing at the dying patches of necrotic tissue spreading across his body. Within a few seconds, his screams faded to agonized groans. He tried to crawl back towards us as he died.
"Run!"
I screamed, grabbing Anna's hand and forcing her to sprint by my side. Philip was already one step ahead of us, frantically trying to reach the shelter of the forest. I heard the ground shake behind me as Mr. Welcome drew near, moving much faster than we could ever hope to go. I knew we would never make it. "Keep going, no matter what," I yelled at Philip and Anna. They kept running, the animal instinct to survive now foremost in their minds. I had to suppress mine. I turned to face the creature, the evil pig god known as Mr. Welcome. In hindsight, I don't know if God or some divine power had interceded, but the bear mace was probably one of the few items that could have saved us at that moment. Mr. Welcome had many eyes, and now that he was running on all four paws, his face was within reach. As my heart palpitated wildly, I raised the bear mace and sprayed at his dozen eyes. He didn't slow, and I had to jump to the side to keep from being trampled. The air whooshed past me as if a subway car had gone by. But a moment later, Mr. Welcome gave a roar, and not one of anger and hunger. This was a roar of pain and uncertainty. Blinded, Mr. Welcome frantically started running in circles, knocking down huge swathes of trees. The ear-splitting racket as he pulled the forest apart crashed over the surrounding landscape. Without a moment of hesitation, I turned to follow Philip and Anna back to the car. We told the police about the barn and all the hostages, but they claimed they couldn't find it, and we never heard anything more about it. Looking back on the experience, I now know why Chernobyl is a restricted zone, and it isn't just because of the radioactivity. There are some things that hide under the surface. After all, things that grow in the dark, rotted places where no eyes roam. Story 5. Lost Boy. I was doing the dishes when my son told me that he'd made a new friend. He tugged on my pant leg and asked me if his new friend could come inside. We'd just moved into a quiet, suburban neighborhood in Minnesota, and I remember being happy that Atticus was already meeting people, so I went to the front door, expecting to meet a neighborhood boy. There was nothing, just an empty screen door opening up to a cool spring morning. I looked quizzically down at my son, who was still beaming with pride and excitement at the prospect of an afternoon playing with his new buddy. "His name's Jeb. Can he come in?" "Buddy, there's nobody there," I said to him. Attie's face immediately pulled down in an undignified frown. "He's right there," Atticus pouted. My grin only irritated him further. "He is, though," Atticus insisted. I humored him. Nothing. Just balmy sunlight streaming into our house and various bugs pelting themselves against the screen trying to get in. I assumed that Atticus had made a friend, as in literally made himself an imaginary friend. I tried not to show any disappointment because I've heard that it's completely normal behavior for a 7-year-old to do things like this. I made a mental note to be a better dad and take him to the playground more often. "All right, buddy. Well, I can't see him. You say his name is Jeb?" "Yeah." "He's hurt. Can he come inside to play?" That last comment made my skin itch, and I felt troubled. "Hurt?" A gloom settled around my corridor, and the sunny front yard felt threatening despite blossoming dogwood trees and a sky filled with puffy cumulus clouds. I chastised myself for being afraid of my son's imagination, but Atticus declaring that his invisible friend was hurt made me start a little bit. I eased down into my chair so that we could talk eye to eye. "Why do you say he's hurt?" Atticus was frustrated that I couldn't understand such an obvious concept. "Because his head is all wrong, and he's red," he huffed. He pointed at the screen door. I felt like I'd swallowed a rock. "Can Jeb come in, please?" "No, buddy. Tell Jeb to go home. Maybe some other time." Atticus was distraught by this and let me know in no uncertain terms that he was displeased and that I was a terrible father. After his time out, we were able to recoup the day with Legos. When my wife came home, I told her, almost, all about Atticus's new friend, Jeb. Obviously, I left out that one singular detail. I wrote it off as Attie's overactive imagination and made a note to read more age-appropriate books to him in the future. Maybe something in Watership Down had conjured Jeb. I knew that this would be a non-starter, as both Atticus and I really liked Watership Down. "Spooky," Christine said non-committally. "That's it? Spooky." Christine shrugged. "I mean, I don't know what else to say. It's spooky, and he's always been a little strange that way. Do you remember when he was a baby, and he was always smiling at that same corner of the old house?" I did remember. Christine never admitted it, but I had always thought that Attie's little preoccupation with that singular corner of the guest bedroom might have had something to do with our expedited move. I'm not normally prone to fearing ghosts and ghoulies, but I could remember many dark, early mornings in the old house where I would feel truly unsettled. I remember trying to feed Atticus, and he wouldn't want the bottle because he would be staring wide-eyed at the corner of the room and smiling. As much as I had tried to attribute that to some weird little quirk in my son, it's not a pleasant thing to experience in the loneliest hours of the night. What's worse is that when Atticus started talking, he started to fear that corner. I remember him wailing, "No," pitifully and burying his face in my arms, trying to hide from whatever he saw there. I never told Christine this, but one time I asked him what was wrong, and a much younger Attie told me that he didn't think the man's smile was a nice smile. I also never told Christine about the time that Attie saw a picture of a skull in an old history book, and Attie had plopped his little finger on the picture and beamed just like the man in the corner. Yes, vaguely. I lied, but that's just Attie's imagination. Smart kids are like that. Well, all I'm saying is that Atticus can be spooky sometimes. It's probably just one more creepy phase of his because you, she pointed playfully, won't stop reading him scary stories. MR, James helps him sleep. MR, James helps everyone sleep. It's not like I'm reading him Jack Ketchum. She gave me a look suggesting that I was being pedantic. I knew she was right, and resolved to concede that later, and also to read him some Narnia for a little while. So, should we just ignore Jeb for now? I asked Christine. She nodded. Yeah, but make sure that you don't ever say that he can come inside. Just in case? I finished. Just in case. She nodded prudently. Atticus woke us up that night and asked once again if Jeb could come inside to play. Can he please? He's crying and he says he's lost. Under no circumstances. Buddy, go back to sleep. I grunted into my pillow. Atticus plodded to my side of the bed and poked me lightly. I can't sleep. He won't stop crying and he's really loud. I cocked an eyebrow in reply, and he knew to drop it. I rolled out of bed and plucked him up in my arms. Come on, bud. We'll draw the curtains and put on a noisemaker or something. I slung him over my shoulder like a sack of potatoes, the way he's loved being carried since he was a baby, and took him into the hallway. Normally, Atticus would chuckle softly while I carried him, but tonight I could feel him shaking. By the time I had him back into his bedroom, he was nearly inconsolable. Atty loves his room. It's filled with pictures of astronauts and rocket ships, and he has those cheap glow-in-the-dark stars and planets on every surface in the room. He even made me arrange them into familiar constellations, which he could tell you the names of, but I cannot. To me, it's the bedroom I would have wanted for myself as a kid. But as I tucked him into bed, he couldn't stop staring wide-eyed at the narrow band of window which was visible from behind his solar system curtains. The room was cold too, and by that I mean it felt like being outside on a winter night. I tried to ignore this. You're okay, buddy, I said consolingly, and I moved to shut his curtains. I stopped briefly. The edges of his window were lined in a jagged layer of frost. It was a warm May night outside. There was positively no reason why there should be a frost. I grimaced and watched the layer of frost creep across the window pane like an infection. I felt that same gloomy dread that I had felt earlier in the afternoon, and I turned to look at my son. His eyes were wide and wet in the dim light from his nightlight. Atticus, I said haltingly, are you afraid of Jeb? Atty nodded silent agreement. I hastily shut the window curtain and knelt by his bedside. He calmed down a little, enough for me to ask him, why, buddy, I thought Jeb was your friend. Atty tried to burrow into his blankets. I think Jeb is getting mad at me, he whimpered. I pressed my mouth into a flat line and looked at the window again. There was nothing for a few moments then. From behind the closed curtain came a long, slow whistle. It was a pathetic and mournful sound, and unsteady as if the whistler were only just learning. It came breathy and sharp from just outside. It was the sad keening of something lost and suffering. I turned back to Atticus. That Jeb? My son nodded and fresh tears welled up in his eyes. His words from earlier came back to me. His head is all wrong, and he's red. All right, stay with us tonight, but let's not make a habit of this. The next day that I discovered that Jeb was real, as I was rolling my trash down the driveway, my neighbor, Dan, came huffing up to meet me in the street. Dan was a typical suburban husband and father, no judgment. So am I, and I saw no reason why the two of us shouldn't have been friends, except that he was insufferably nosy and rather grim. He stayed up most nights reading the police blotter and generally trying to absorb as much terrible information about our little city as he could. Then he would find neighbors and bemoan the state of his town. Jack, did you hear the news? He waved excitedly. I now know that whenever Dan gets very animated in the morning, that something terrible has happened. I let my garbage can thud into place and waited politely to hear about the latest awful thing. The Kroger was robbed. His eyes lit up. Terrific, I said flatly. Town's kinda going to shit, he murmured. Gets worse every year. He shook his head. It never used to be like this. I nodded an apology. Suppose not, I said. Anyone die? He usually only bothered to tell me about these things if someone was killed. Dan shook his head. Not in that one. But did you hear about the kid? That piqued my interest a little bit. I asked, even though I didn't want to. Kid? Dan shook his head in disbelief. Kid was riding his bike and got crushed by a drunk driver. It happened at 2 in the afternoon. Who's drunk at 2 in the afternoon? Lots of people. Oh. And then I asked the question that I didn't want to know the answer to. Do you know the kid's name? Dan blinked, surprised that I'd asked. John? I'm pretty sure it was John something. Jeb? His eyes rounded. Yes. Oh, you already knew. Messed up, right? Killed by a drunk driver at 2 in the afternoon. 3 blocks from our house. 2 in the afternoon. Hey, you okay? You look sick. I'm fine. I'm gonna run back inside. I turned unsteadily and walked back inside with leaden feet. Thanks for the news, as always. A cursory internet search revealed that indeed, a young boy had been crushed by a drunk driver yesterday afternoon. I tried to remember exactly when Atticus had first spoken to me about Jeb, but it was hazy. When I opened the link to read the entire article, I almost retched. The article displayed the mutilated face of a young boy. The entire right side of his face looked like it had been crushed in by a terrible force, so that all the structure had completely gone out of it, so that it looked like a wet bag of raw meat and hair. His bloodied right eye peered dolefully out from where I thought his cheek should have been, and his mouth was torn into a lipless grimace where the road had burned off the lower half of his face. Jeb's left eye, however, stared out at the viewer with twinkling menace and intelligence. In that moment, I was certain that Jeb was looking at me from my computer monitor. I jerked back from my monitor. I was offended for Jeb, who, in their tasteless desire for page views, had decided it was appropriate to put that image on their website. I slammed my laptop closed and left the room. I even considered calling the local paper to voice my disgust to their editor. I resolved to do this. But when I returned to the webpage a few hours later, the image displayed was a school picture of a smiling young boy with dark brown hair and a gap-toothed grin. In the moment, I had reasoned that they must have changed it out of respect. Things didn't get better. Atticus became more and more withdrawn, and no longer asked me if Jeb could come inside to play. He avoided the subject pointedly, and when I asked the next day if Jeb still wanted to come inside, Atty just flattened his mouth and refused to answer me. That night, the whistling was outside his window again. Christine, too, started acting strangely. I started to find thick lines of salt on all our windowsills and in front of our doorways. When I asked Christine about them, she tried to act casually about it, just in case. She affirmed, "You don't cover the house in salt on a whim. What's going on?" She didn't respond immediately, but I pressed her. "What's going on?" "Did you know that a little boy got killed right near our house?" she asked me flatly. My heart sank into my stomach, and I looked away guiltily. "Yeah, I didn't want to scare you." "Okay, well now we've moved from Atticus has a creepy imaginary friend to a boy matching the name of Atty's imaginary friend was killed outside our house on the same day that Atty started seeing him." She took a breath. "Something's going on. Atty's room is always freezing, and I'm hearing whistling outside the house, and why are you smiling?" I forced a frown. "Sorry, it's just nice to not feel like I'm going crazy." She waved her hand. "You know you don't need to try and handle all of this stuff on your own." She shuddered. "Something's happening with our son. We tried all the layman's tricks. She burned sage in the house and started calling priests to try and bless us. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel silly doing things like that. Why would salt and sage and priests work? Yet they seemed to. Atticus didn't mention anything about Jeb for a long time, and in a week or two he started to come out of his shell again. The peace lasted for almost 2 weeks, but that ended when I heard a metallic crash from the back side of our house, and our motion detector was triggered, engaging the floodlights. I was still mostly asleep, when I blindly tore through our kitchen to burst through the back door, but I knew with a sick feeling what the sound had been. Despite the stillness of the backyard, I knew that something was wrong. The crickets and insects were utterly silent, and our floodlight illuminated the sycamores in a jarring white light. The energy was tense and expectant, even though nothing was there. I didn't bother to scan the yard, but ran instead to the side of the house to confirm my suspicion about the source of the noise. Our cellar door gaped open, and the inside latch was torn apart and hanging uselessly. I had an unobstructed view of our basement steps, leading into the utter darkness beneath our house. Then a few things happened in quick succession. First, a sharp whistle wafted from the dark basement at the foot of the cellar steps. Before, the sound had been piteous and soft, as if the whistler had been shy and plaintive. Now, it was piercing and shrill with a terrible potency behind it. Second, the wooden steps leading from the basement to our kitchen shuddered violently as something sprinted furiously towards the kitchen door. Third, Atticus started wailing in terror. It took me no more than 3 seconds to get to Attie's room, where I found he and Christine huddled together on the bed with him screaming in terror. He was so distraught that he couldn't stop hiccuping, and between fits he would murmur, "He's so mad. What did you do?" We all looked at each other hopelessly as the temperature in Atticus's bedroom plummeted, caught together in this nightmare. All of us spent the night in the master bedroom with lines of salt laid down in front of every entrance and a Virgin Mary prayer candle sputtering on the shelf. I didn't sleep a wink. I couldn't, not with the sound of tiny footsteps pattering up and down our hallway all night long. Things haven't gotten any better. I asked Atticus if Jeb had told him what he wanted. The answer that Atticus gave leaves me with no doubt that he's in terrible danger. Jeb wants to play with me forever. Story 6. I was followed by the corpse of an angel. When I was a little younger, about 8-10 years ago, something completely unexplainable happened to me. I don't tell this story to anyone, mostly because up until earlier today, even I thought it wasn't real. I'm not sure what to do about it, or if there is anything I could do. So I thought to post here, maybe at least just to ease my head and hear what others think. Around high school time, I was a loser and complete shut-in. Most of my time during these formative teenage years, I'd just spend inside, playing games or listening to music and spacing out. Though I've always had a fond interest with photography, capturing life through brief screenshots is precious. Plus, it's fun and easy to do with just the average phone. So, occasionally, I would leave on my own to wander the woods at the end of our street. Gave me plenty of time alone to get fresh air and stretch as well as snap a bunch of pictures of mostly bugs, but other animals or plants I found pretty too. On one of these walks, I heard a very off-putting sound. It vibrated very quietly along the trees and in the surrounding area. Whilst I'm normally a very paranoid person, and I was certainly uneased by the presence of this noise, I thought I recognized it. From the distance I was to whatever was producing it. The sound vaguely resembled that of a pig. My thought was, maybe some livestock had escaped from a nearby farm or something. Whether I was right or not, it sounded hurt. The slow, agonized rattle, piercing the odd bird chirp or rustle of a branch falling. Then, I made a decision that would scar my life forever. I approached. If it was hurt, I wasn't just going to leave it to bleed to death or whatever. I know, circle of life and all that, but I was young and much dumber than I am now. I made a brief trek off the path to find the source of the noise and, hopefully, save it. Wading through a bramble bush that slightly cut my legs, I began to focus on the sound. Or, rather, the sound seemingly gave me no choice but to focus on it. No birds were chirping anymore, and aside from my movements, the rising repetitive groans were all I could hear. Everything from the leaves in the trees to the soft blowing winds fell still. Something felt off, and in my stomach I had a strong rising urge to turn back. But I didn't. The sound grew closer, and I hadn't ventured too far from the path. It wasn't deafening by any means, but the sound punched through the silence with now a twinge of desperation, like I needed to find it. Up until this very moment, I have never forgotten what I saw. In a ditch, just like any other, surrounded by trees and leaf litter, but completely devoid of life. Something indescribable. The closest resemblance I could give you is it was similar in shape and size to whale carcasses that wash ashore, a messy pile of color and rotting substances. Except there were so many materials, so many different textures I simply couldn't identify. There was no discernible body shape or figure. It merely looked as if you had fused together parts of every animal alive and draped a cloth over top of the result. It was warping constantly. I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. I simply couldn't understand what this was. What confused me the most was the smell, or rather, lack of one. The environment smelt just fine. The leaves and earthy natural scent, as if this thing in front of me wasn't even there. My heart began to thump a little. I'd never seen a dead body in person, obviously, so I had no clue if I was stumbling upon something I wasn't supposed to see. This wasn't what I was looking for, and the groaning sound was pulsating from it. On edge, the slightest sounds began to feel like spears of anxiety cutting straight through my chest. I fell back a little, caught myself and ran back to the path. No one was around, so I didn't care about keeping my composure, and I ran until I caught sight of home again. My mother was home and noticed me sweaty, shaky and on edge. "Home already? Your walks normally last a while longer," she inquired, with a very minor tone of concern. Yeah, just got a bit tired," I explained, as I still hadn't fully come to terms with what I'd seen and didn't feel that anyone in my family would think anything of it other than that I was losing my mind. She told me that food was being prepared and wouldn't be very long, but I returned to my room swiftly and collapsed face first onto my bed. I pondered for a while over what it could have been and came to the conclusion of an art project. It had no scent, so perhaps it was a sculpt with sound effects for a film. The indescribable mass being man-made brought me enough comfort to slow my heart rate for the time. For a brief duration, nothing else happened. I refused to return to the woods for a while, so I had no more encounters with whatever it was. Purely so that I could continue to convince myself that it was nothing more than a creative pursuit. That didn't last for very long, though, cozy and warm in bed, I was scrolling my phone absent-mindedly. I hadn't thought about the thing all day, as I had spent it hanging out with friends outside of school. The slight buzz of my bedside lamp, the busyness of the kitchen downstairs, the slow, creeping ringing in my ears as everything fell silent, then that haunting, slow rasping seeping under the crack of my door. The drawn-out groan pushed its way into my room, my only safe place. I could listen to nothing else. I could think of nothing else as I watched a shadow slowly stretch along the floor, invading the dim light. My eyes grew wide and fearful. I clutched my phone as if it was my last hope, and I shuffled out of bed to avoid being caught off guard. If I needed to run, I could run. The doorknob turned, muted by the great harrowing moans. The door creaked open, drowned out still by the desperate sounds of that nightmarish sight. The doorway opened, giving way to a strange light. It flooded my room as if bright yet pervasively infected each corner of my vision with darkness. In a swift, jarring movement, a mass stretched out from behind the obscurant surface, like skin being pulled from someone's body to create the mockery of a head. It had the same damn warping textures as the thing I found in the woods. It had no other features and was merely a protruding clump of moving substances. Except, somewhere within the shifting motion, I could pick out a face, one with a deep, haunting gaze. It was as if its eyelids had been peeled back and fused into the skin above and below its eye sockets, unprotected orbs that only stared and stared. Similarly, deep holes, where the nose had been pushed back into its head and once again fused into its undefined, formless mass. It had no mouth. All it could do was emit muffled cries as it stretched and quivered in place. I blinked. "Hon, we're going out for a little to get some shopping done. We'll be back soon. Love you," my mother called out, as I watched her slip back through the door. That vision, That thing had vanished instantly, but its presence remained. A few days later, I had calmed down once again, thinking I must have hallucinated from a lack of sleep after panicking over the thing I'd seen. The bell rung for the 6th time in the day, and I headed to art class. I sat by my friend, Alex, with a slight uneasy shiver in my body. I tried to brush it off, and we joked a little in murmurs as the teacher rambled on. Toward the end of the subject, as we were doing practical work in the form of paintings, when the bell rang a little earlier than I'd expected, I turned my face to see how everyone else was responding to it. They'd all turned to me, too, blank, staring faces, even Alex, even the teacher, everyone. In an immediate fit of panic, I jolted out of my seat, slamming my knees on the desk. I winced in pain, but still, their eyes followed me perfectly. I shuffled past people, wobbling a little from hurting my knees, and bolted out of the classroom. Things just kept happening, and I didn't know why. Through the hallways, that growing darkness began to appear, before I burst out into the courtyard. There, a slow rattling groan awoken in my ears again. I was becoming extremely familiar and recognized it immediately. Tears began to roll out of my eyes as I screamed, trying to drown out the sound. But it didn't work. It grew louder and louder, deafening my surroundings. I opened my eyes wide again to see a huge, limp mass in front of me, shapeless and constantly contorting. It had no identifiable features beyond the shifting, unknown textures and colors. Taller than it was wide, I tried to see where a head should be on a human, but once again, just a repulsive slurry that I couldn't understand. But it was looking at me. It was looking at me, watching, staring, observing anywhere I moved I could not hide. The sound began to hurt, the pulsing, rising groan of misery that pained me. I screamed once more, clutching my head. Alex grabbed my arm violently. "Hey," he questioned, worriedly. I let go of myself and looked up. My classmates all turned to look at me, but no longer staring. They were whispering amongst themselves. Then the bell rang, and the teacher awkwardly hurried to move everyone out. I looked back down shakily, very faint bloodstains where I had clasped my ears, and everything felt a little quieter. Alex offered to take me to the medical office, and I was far too exhausted to refuse. He had to return to classes after the break, but I was too shaken up to even speak. So they let me stay a little longer, and I was sent home shortly after. I went home and stayed quiet. I was drained. I lay there, appreciating the precious silence of my room. School had just finished, and I received a text from my friends. We shortly arranged to go on a walk together through the woods to help me feel better. I wanted to show them what I'd been seeing. Though my parents were hesitant, they allowed it since my friends, Alex and May, would be there. They arrived, and we set off toward the woods. But I directed them to the specific section I had ran out from. I didn't want to be out here longer than I needed to be. We arrived at the spot, but the sounds weren't there anymore. Maybe it was because of my slightly dulled hearing. But there was nothing. Desperate to convince myself I was still sane, I hurried them off the path. "No, there's something here you need to see," I began, immediately turning and stumbling in the direction of where I'd seen it. Alex was less hesitant than May, but both eventually followed. "If you say so." "What is it anyway?" Alex asked. "I don't know," is all I could respond with. He turned to May with confusion, who anxiously shrugged back. I stepped over the bramble bush again, making sure not to cut myself on it like before. Still, nothing. The ditch was there. There was a clear indication that something had filled this space due to the unnatural scatter of leaves around it. But it just wasn't there. It was here before," I cried out, as much as it freaked me out. I was hoping for any sign that I was overreacting. "The leaves? The trees? What are we looking at here?" Alex chipped in. I turned to him with a dreary hopelessness. His expression fell a little. "Why don't we just head back onto the trail for now?" May called. I gave in, slowly returning to the path. Since it wasn't there, maybe I had nothing to fear traveling through the woods again. But there it was. The distant, faint sound of a hurt animal groaning in slow, painful misery. "You guys hear that?" Alex commented. Immediately, I snapped with fear. "Yes." I didn't know what to do. My legs began to shake again and my vision was blurring as the sound grew closer. But we weren't moving this time. It was. I ran. I couldn't help myself. I think Alex or May called out to me just before I did, but I couldn't stop. The further I ran, the sound never faded, but it never grew. Only when I reached my home did it disappear. I ripped open the door, slammed it shut and ran straight up to my room. I didn't wait to take my shoes off or hear what my mother had to say. I buried myself in my pillow and cried. Later that night, they both texted in our group chat, frustrated that I pulled a weird prank like that, expressing how worried and concerned they were. I stopped going to school for the rest of the week, as my ears had both become infected and hard to hear out of. It was irritating as hell, so I was more than happy to lay in bed all day. This last part is a little hazy to me due to the actions I took at the end. Most of this is missing details, but this night specifically, I have desperately tried to block out of my memory. It wasn't until recently it came back to me in pieces. I remember my whole family was out for various reasons. My parents were both working late shifts, and my sister was having a sleepover at her friend's. I was especially anxious already because of my situation, so I crawled out of bed and clumsily headed downstairs. I poured a very shallow bowl of cereal. When that familiar sound kicked up again, I was taking absolutely no chances, dropping the bowl on the counter and rushing to lock everything I could. Every single door, every single window, up until the very last one. I turned, jittery and terrified. Something was there. The front room's secondary window, a smaller, more ornate patterned window compared to the large glass pane in the center of the wall. Through the textured glass, I saw it. I was face to face with an angel. A stretched, warping face with the familiar peeled eyes and nose. We locked eyes and it immediately slipped away unnaturally. I could hear nothing, but I locked the window as fast as possible and nearly tripped skidding back to the stairs. The sound grew louder yet again, louder than it had been, making my ears burn with searing agony. Nowhere was safe. I hadn't locked this thing out. I had caged myself in for it. My panic grew as my heart beat faster. I rushed into the bathroom as I heard the door downstairs very slowly creaking open without the slightest resistance from the locks. I ripped open the medicine cabinet and darted back to my room with sleeping pills in hand. I knew this was it for me. I had an unexplainable feeling, just as indescribable as the formless carcass that was coming for me. I didn't want to be there when it happened. Last I remember, I finally smelt it approaching. A hideous mesh of ash and rotten meat. The smell permeated my room as my eyes began to shudder. I could feel the physical pain of them kicking in. I was already exhausted, and I don't know if I fell asleep quickly or if I just blocked out most of before I did. I awoke a week later. My parents were in tears, wondering why I'd ever tried to take my own life and wishing that I'd spoken to them. For 10 long years, my story has ended there. A crazy drug trip from trying to take my own life. Just yesterday, I checked my phone's old storage to see what was on there, and I saw a video I didn't recognize. It was dark blue and grainy. A few minutes in, however, a door in the background opens. Light flickers in, illuminating me, asleep. 20 long minutes follow. 20 long minutes of raspy, death rattles in the cold, lifeless stare of the corpse of an angel, watching over me. Story 7. The eyes peer back. I've never really been that good of a person growing up. I've always skipped school, had horrendous grades, and I always had a general disregard for rules. To put it lightly, I was not going to be nominated for most likely to succeed anytime soon. My friend Molly was the exact opposite, however. She was bright, always tried in her classes, and had way better marks than me. I had to admit, I was pretty jealous, but she wasn't the kind of person to gloat and tease me for not having as good of grades as her. She sort of saw me as someone lost in their own teenage hubris and tried her best to keep me in line with varying results. At times, we were mistaken as brother and sister or boyfriend and girlfriend, and I was teased for a whole month for that. I surprisingly felt a little bad about my kind of crowd mixing in with the wrong people, but reassurance from Molly made me forget about it. One thing about me that Molly knew very well was that I liked to explore abandoned places. No matter how illegal it was, I still found myself exploring every nook and cranny of any place I could find. Unfortunately, I was running out of places that were suitably creepy for my taste. Now, when I say creepy, I mean just the occasional urban legend surrounding the place that would ultimately be disproven very quickly. The only things that I found interesting about the places I went to were the gang markings that must have been a decade old, and the occasional crackhead that couldn't be bothered to even acknowledge my existence. Either way, my town doesn't have much to offer when it comes to exploration. Something that piqued my interest was the local zoo. It wasn't abandoned whatsoever. Hell, it was the exact opposite during its opening hours. Hundreds of people bustle in and see the animals every day because it's one of the only things to do in this town. I have to admit, it is pretty entertaining to see the animals every once in a while, but the reason why I saw this location as perfect was the fact that the place wasn't completely empty aside from the animals. There's this group of animal rights activists that try to break in and release the animals from their torturous confinement. Almost everyone hates this group, and they've made more than one attempt to release them from their cages. One time they released them during the day, and it caused quite a scene. Everyone had to leave early so that the animals could be put back into their zones and cages. With all of this said and done, I decided it would be quite the experience to maybe catch one of these attempts and see it for myself. At school, I told Molly my plan and she laughed at my idea. She said that although it would be funny to see them in the act, I did have a chance of being caught by one of those lunatics, and who knows what they'll do to me. I told her that I've been doing this for a few years, so I don't think those idiots would know that I was ever there. I then asked if she could join me for the venture later tonight. She, of course, declined, but I insisted. She said that she wasn't experienced at all in whatever I do, and that she doesn't want to risk herself getting caught. I told her that even someone like her could do it, and that two is better than one. She finally changed her mind when I told her that I'll cover our butts when we get caught and tell them that it was my idea. She reluctantly agreed, and she said she needed some rush in her life at some point anyway. Later that night, we met up at a safe distance from the zoo's entrance. We wanted to see the activists going in ourselves just so that we weren't there for nothing. We waited in the dark for so long that I had thought they weren't coming after all. The only light that illuminated the place was a lone street light that lit up the bold lettering on the sign up front that read, Forest Ridge Public Zoo. We decided to sneak around the side of the park property and see if we can find a ladder on the back of one of the shops that built their back walls, bulging out of the side of the wall. As we rounded the corner, I shined my flashlight to the white backs of the buildings that lined up against the wall. That's when I noticed a hanging ladder made of thick, white-laced rope that was tightened by several knots. I guess they beat us to the punch. I didn't even see them. Did you? I whispered to Molly. No, I couldn't see much. It's really dark out here. Either way, you want to go first? Molly offered. I scrambled up the ladder and Molly soon followed. We overlooked the main entrance to the zoo and saw a little light flicker its way in different directions. I ducked under the ledge on the roof and quietly told Molly to do the same. Did you see that? I said in a hushed voice. I think so. Who was that? Molly whispered with a hint of worry in her voice. Calm down. I think that was a security guard. We need to get down to the main floor and see where these people went. I whispered with a hint of worry in myself. We were both in new territory, and I didn't know the repercussions for getting caught. I peeked over the ledge and only saw the faint shadows of the exhibits and no sign of life anywhere. The coast is clear. Follow me, I whispered as I made my way to the rooftop door that led into the store below. I tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge. I've run into this situation many times before. so I pulled out my trusty screwdriver and my set of bobby pins. I inserted the bobby pins into the lock and felt the pressure of the springs in the doorknob release. I carefully pushed up the springs into the cylinder and felt the oh-so-satisfying click of the deadbolt being released from the rusty strike plate. I signaled Molly that the way was clear, and I carefully opened the door that led to the dark, concrete staircase that sent a pit of dread into both of us. We need to be careful down there. Not only do we need to avoid those activists, but we also can't wake up the animals, I whispered clearly and seriously. Okay, Molly whispered back with some uneasiness in her voice. We both crept down the stairs and took great care in not making any noise on the way down. As we were entering the last section of the staircase, we were met with a tight, pitch-black hallway with a checkered pattern tile floor. I took out 2 pocket flashlights and handed one of them to Molly. I clicked the button on the light, and a beam of light shone the ground below me. We can try the side door. Over here, Molly whispers, pointing to the far left of the gift shop. Nice catch, I whispered back. We made our way over to the side door and tried to quietly open the door, only to be stopped by some boxes from the outside. Damn, the boxes are in the way, I hushed in frustration. Try and push them from the inside, Molly suggested. No, I can't risk the noise. We'll need to go out the front. As we snuck to the front of the store, we heard footsteps coming to the store, and we quickly split up into the aisles of the gift store. I turned my flashlight off and hid behind a shelf that had a bunch of stuffed animals on the shelves. As I sat there, crouched behind the shelf, I saw a beam of light scan over my head. I heard footsteps slowly approaching my shelf, and I quickly switched spots and dove into another aisle. I peeked over, and I saw a black figure with a cap on. The figure shone a light onto my previous spot, and I could just see the outline of the bold lettering on his jacket reading, "Security." I stayed quiet for what seemed like hours. That is until I heard the sound of the door opening and closing, and the footsteps fading away. I breathed a sigh of relief and slowly peeked out from my hiding spot. I looked at the window and saw nothing but the glare of the glass pane window. I looked around for Molly and saw that she was hiding under the cashier's desk. She looked petrified and felt glad that the guard was gone. I couldn't blame her. It was her first time, and these moments can get very tense. You did good. That was a close call, I whispered with some relief in my voice. You did too. He almost caught you, Molly whispered. He didn't even spot you. Are you sure you haven't done this before? I said mockingly. Oh, shut up, Jack, she said playfully. Anyway, we should probably move. We can't be caught in the same place, I whispered with caution. We quickly moved to the front door, and I looked through the glass door to see if the security guard was still around. I couldn't see much movement besides our shadows, and I confirmed it was safe to go outside. Beyond the glass door of the gift shop, most of the lights on the walkways were turned off. This was good for us, as we needed to stay in the darkness to hide much easier. We carefully crawled and hid behind the zoo benches that were spread out in between the square bushes and the tall trees that covered our every move. We eventually got to a crossroads with a wooden sign that pointed to different directions to the zoo's various different exhibits. As I was pondering on which way we should go, Molly pointed to a sign on the floor that led to the big cats section. I picked the sign up and saw that it had the activists logo on the front. I guess we should start here, I quietly said, looking at the arrow pointing to the big cats exhibit, followed by a little drawing of a lion right next to it. We followed the path that was enclosed by thick, jungle-like trees that had their branches somewhat sticking out of the foliage and just intersecting the main concrete path. Geez, they should really trim these trees a bit, Molly remarked. Yeah, they get pretty annoying when they're on the pathway, I said, with a hint of annoyance at the pervasive foliage. What? You have experience? Molly snarked. Yeah, I've tripped on these damn things so many times that I lost count. Wow, shouldn't the zoo do something about this? Isn't this a tripping hazard? You bet your ass it is. I'd tell you if my mom hadn't reported this place more than once. But the zoo doesn't do a damn thing about it. To be honest, I'm surprised they haven't gotten sued yet, I said with a hint of comedy embedding in my anecdote. Wait, did you see that? I said, leading us behind a bush. What is it? Molly asked with confusion on why we hid so suddenly. That. I pointed at two mounds on the floor with two cube-shaped objects next to each other. Do you want me to check? I said with some shakiness in my voice. Are you sure? Is it safe? Molly worriedly asked. I don't know. I'll check really quickly and see if it's safe. Okay. I took a deep breath and gathered as much courage as I could. I got my flashlight and clicked it on. Its beams shined ahead of me, and I stalked forward into the dim path that laid before me. As I got closer, I noticed a dark red liquid was sprayed over the grey pavement, and an iron smell wafted into my nostrils. My heart dropped once my flashlight beam laid over the two mounds. The two mounds were barely recognizable as human. Chunks of flayed flesh surrounded them, and their internal organs were splattered on the concrete with bite marks on the legs, hands, arms, and almost all over their torsos. I nearly threw up at the sight of it, and I was too sick to notice that Molly had noticed the carnage as well. What happened here? Molly said, shocked at the scene before her. I don't know. Did we just witness a murder? I said, still gasping for air. As I scrambled to my feet, I noticed the two boxes on the floor with the contents spilled all over the walkway. I picked one up and saw it was a prescription bottle filled with white pills with green specks embedded inside them. Molly, what is this? I said, handing her one of the bottles. This looks like amphetamine pills. What are they doing with these here? She pondered to herself. I looked to my right and saw the protective fencing and the wooden gating had been torn off. Just below the broken gate was cutting pliers and metal tins. Molly, what do amphetamines do again? I asked, already knowing the answer. It calms you down. Why? She said matter-of-factly. What are some of the side effects of amphetamines, Molly? I questioned, trying to lead her into what I was thinking. Her face turned pale as she now knew what I was getting at. It makes them angrier. I sighed in frustration at the situation and threw the pills on the floor. I put my hands on my head and started to think about what we should do next. Should we leave? Molly questioned. No, I don't think we can, I said with some exhaustion in my voice. Why not? Because those bastards will pin this on us. We don't have gloves on, do we? If we let them do this to the animals, I can't imagine what would happen tomorrow morning. Then, when the police come and investigate, they'll see our fingerprints, and those nutjobs will pin this entire incident on us to cover their tracks. So what do we do then? Jack, Molly said, throwing her arms up in distress. We need to get some evidence that proves that we weren't involved in any way, and stop these lunatics from hurting any of the other animals. If we catch them in time, we could possibly save the animals from being under the influence of whatever this medicine is. That sounds all well and good, Jack. But how are we going to do this? Molly said, interested in what my so-called plan would be. While we were getting over here, I saw some security cameras. That must mean that someone is watching our every move. Now we need to find out where that is, and find some footage that shows the activists entering and giving the animals the medicine. That way, we can't be blamed for this, and the activists would be screwed legally. That sounds good, but what about the animals? How do we prevent them from being drugged? Molly questioned. That I do not know. My answer did not please Molly one bit. You don't know? Then, how are we supposed to do this? Like I said, I don't know. Do you have any ideas? I said, hoping for some sort of answer. The only thing I could think of is that they're asleep, and we can take away the water they're given. Molly said with some hesitancy. I thought about it and said, that might work. Molly looked back, hopefully. Underneath a large oak tree, we sat behind rounded square bushes and peeked over at the featureless building up ahead. This should be it, I said. looking at the lack of detail of the building ahead of us. "Are you sure this is it?" "Hopefully. The building's easy to miss," I said, looking at my watch. 2 a.m. We need to hurry before the staff come in at 6. "Okay." The camera's looking away. "Go." Molly and I quickly moved to the side of the building. Before we positioned ourselves, all of the lampposts were shut off all at once. They found their way to the power supply. "Is that a good thing?" Molly said. "Yeah, I think. More cover for us. And them." Molly did not like the last part. "We've got our chance. Look out for anything, and I'll try and get the door open." I pointed my light to the keyhole and started to fidget around with the mechanism inside. It was relatively strong as expected and somewhat difficult to get the pins in the right place. Eventually, after many tries and gripes from Molly about being finished yet, the lock clicked open and the door slowly opened, revealing its pitch-black insides. The room inside wasn't particularly special, only containing shelves of boxes and crates. However, an open doorway was tucked behind a large, rectangular crate. After some help from Molly, the crate revealed what we were looking for. A series of monitors plastered the back wall of the room. Several monitors and servers were seemingly working perfectly. I went over to the main set of monitors and they all sprung to life. I clicked on one of the cameras that showed one of the exhibits and saw something that made my face go cold. The exhibits were all empty. I tried for the life of me to see if any of the animals were still in their cages, but none of them were. I saw lions and cheetahs roaming the food courts, gorillas and orangutans fighting in the shops, jackals and foxes rummaging through knocked-over stands, and more animals outside of the exhibits. We were too late. It seemed that every single animal was affected. I looked around for any sign of the activists, and I found nothing. Then I looked at the camera that was near the office, and I saw the camera knocked over on the floor. Shortly before the camera disconnected, I saw the image of animalistic eyes looking directly into the camera. "Molly, lock the door now," I frantically said, pointing at the open doorway. Molly, not understanding the situation, did so urgently and locked the security office door. Molly was about to ask what was going on until she saw the screen and immediately understood my reaction. "Jack, what do we do?" Molly whispered, on the verge of tears. I fell silent and I didn't know what to say. What do we do? Reality set into me and I started to feel regret. We should have never gone here. I should have never brought her here. We're going to die here because of me. Molly noticed how distressed I was and started to try in her best efforts to calm me down. "We can't get those animals back in their cages. Jack, that's what we both know. What we can do is get out of here and call the police. All we need to do is leave. We just need to know how to do it." I nodded. "Yeah, we need to leave this place. We just need evidence first," Molly agreed. I looked back towards the computer and found a recording of the footage that had the activists in clear view. I downloaded the footage and saved it to a USB that was in one of the drawers. I put the USB in my pocket and started to ponder. Ideas were floating around in my head and all of them were risky. I started to pace around the room and tried to grasp at something. Time was a luxury that we can't afford to lose, and I had to think of something that we could use. "What's the plan, Jack?" Molly said quietly. "We need to leave, but with those animals outside, I'm not sure. The way we came in isn't an option at all because of obvious reasons. Maybe something in this room." I started to rummage around in the desks and found a Phillips head screwdriver tucked in between paperwork. Maybe this could work, I thought. I looked around the room for something that I could potentially screw off and found a vent opening that was just small enough to look through to the other side of the wall. I scanned the room with the flashlight and found nothing except the boxes and crates from earlier. The door that led to the destruction outside vibrated slightly in varying intervals. I didn't want to think about what could be waiting for us beyond that door. I scanned the office further and found an opening in the corner of the room. The opening was blocked by large crates and wooden pallets. I looked towards the locked door of the security room and I reached for the knob. Molly must have seen my hand and asked, "Do you know what you're doing?" "I think I just want to check something. Are you sure? What are you trying to check? I saw this little opening in the back of the room out there. I gestured outside the door. Okay then, be careful, for our sake, Molly said, opening the door and watching me creep outside towards the end of the room. I carefully moved the crates to the side, and it revealed a square opening that is big enough for someone to crawl through. Come look at this. I think this is our way out. Molly comes over and looks into the darkness of the vent. The vent was dusty, and tiny cobwebs were sticking to the corners of the vent. You, Jack, there's cobwebs in there, Molly said, disgusted. Do you see any other way out of here? I said, gesturing to the unknown darkness of the industrial closet that we trapped ourselves in. Good point, Jack. Come on, let's move. I crawled on all fours into the vent, and Molly hesitantly followed after me. I shined the flashlight forward, which led to my elbows touching the dust-covered vent floors. I covered my arms and hands with my sweater, and started to hold in the need to release the phlegm in my throat, which was waiting to be let out in a string of coughing fits. The walls of the steel vents echoed the thumps of arms and legs. I held my breath for as long as I could, waiting for something to come around the corner. Soon enough, I found the vertical lining of a cover at the very end of a short vent passageway. As I approached the vent cover with a screwdriver ready in hand, I stopped dead in my tracks as I heard the chilling noises of flesh tearing from bone. From the vent, I can vaguely see legs of an animal shaking from the tension of tearing meat from a particularly stubborn subject. Blood trickled down in a large red pool, and it leaked into the crevasse of the vent. It reached my arm, and my spine shivered from the very fate that potentially waited for us outside of this metal grate. However, my thoughts were pierced by a sharp feeling of being watched. I looked at the grate and saw eyes peering into the darkness that contained both me and Molly. Its slit pupil narrowed into a snarl. A black jaw gnawed loudly at the grate, which started to shake violently. I gripped the screwdriver as my life literally depended on it. Soon, the opening would be clear, and my opportunity to strike would arrive for only a few moments. The vent was now torn off, and its head started to narrow into the opening, and it aimed for my arm in order to pull me into the carnage outside. As its head shot forward towards my arm, I thrusted my screwdriver into the general direction of the animal. Its screeches echoed into the darkness of the helpless night. It staggered back and fell to the floor in pain. I scrambled out of the vent and looked at the creature. The first thing that caught my attention was its face. The screwdriver was buried into the creature's eye. Blood trickled down in droves, and its face alone said how much pain it was in. However, its face also showed unwavering anger and rage at whoever had done this to them. That unfortunate soul would have to wait, because it had to escape. It bolted away, and a small trail of blood followed it. Molly looked at me with terror in her eyes. "Are you okay?" Molly said, with panic in her voice. I looked at my hand and saw blood running down into my sleeve. Further down my arm was a slight puncture into the cloth of my jacket. I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw that it didn't break the skin. "Yeah, thank God," I said, with a small sigh of relief. When I went to pick up the screwdriver, it was now covered in blood. The screwdriver shook in my hands, and the feeling of doing such a thing to an animal gave me a sharp chill down my back. "Jack, you're shaking. Are you feeling all right?" she said from behind, laying her hand on my shoulder. "I just hurt an animal. It didn't have anything to do with those activists. Should I feel bad about this, Molly?" "No, I don't think so. It attacked you, and you defended yourself. What else were you supposed to do?" "I don't know, Molly. It was drugged. It was angry. I feel like a monster," I said, fighting back tears. "Look, Jack, it's difficult to say what you're feeling right now, but now is not the time. We need to leave before one of those animals finds us." I looked down at the puncture in my sleeve. "Yeah, we should." Did you find anything?" Molly asked, leaning up against the wall. "Not yet. A lot of the exits here are very risky. I flipped through the cameras and scanned for any resemblance of some sort of exit with no luck." I sighed. I can't find anything, Molly. Do you have any ideas? Well, there is the way we came in, but from the looks of it, we'd be lunch meat before we even get there, Molly pondered. I sat there in the chair for a minute and tried my hardest to think of something. We can try and wait till morning, I said, trying to take a stab in the dark. I was interrupted by a sudden scratch at the door leading outside. That shot my idea down pretty quickly. I sighed in frustration, planted my hands on the table, and looked down at the keyboard. I was drawing a blank yet again, and I looked at the security cameras yet again. I was fully expecting to find nothing yet again, but something caught my eye. In the horrible, pixelated screen in front of me was a gap in the middle of one of the outside walls that seemingly led to the back alleys of the main entrance. Molly, come look at this. I beckoned excitedly. What is it? What did you find? She said with piqued interest. Look at that right there. I pointed at the slightly noticeable gap in the wall. What is that? Molly said, squinting her eyes to try and make out the low-quality image on screen. I think that's a gap. It might be a way out. I zoomed into the gap and saw part of a pathway that led behind the buildings. Nice catch, Jack. How'd you notice that? I guess looking at the screen for a while has done me some good, I said while looking at the map plastered on the wall. From that map on the wall over there, I think that crack is around the back of the cotton candy stand near the entrance. It shouldn't be far from here, I said, feeling in my pockets to check if the USB is still there, and thankfully it was. After gathering up the courage for the both of us, we headed into the vent for the second time, and we were a lot more perceptive of our surroundings this time. I peeked outside of the vent and saw that it was clear this time around. We crawled out of the dusty, cobwebbed vent and advanced towards the path that took us to the front of the building. I looked to the floor and saw a small trail of blood that led around the back of the cotton candy stand. A sinking feeling of dread and exhaustion started to brew in my stomach, but the thought of that path being our only way out made my ever-growing desperation for escaping stronger than the trail of blood that preceding us. We climbed onto the dumpster and squeezed our way through the crack. Before us was a long concrete corridor with several stands blocking the left side. As we walked down this long passageway, we saw something slumped against the concrete wall to the right. Upon closer inspection, we saw something that made our hearts drop. A man slumped against the wall, with intestines hanging out, and a gunshot wound under his cheek with the exit wound going out the top. His brain was splattered against the wall behind him with the blood splattering high. I couldn't take it at this point. I dry heaved and my eyes started to water. Molly looked away with audible disgust and started gagging. The worst part of all is the bold lettering on the man's jacket, security. I looked back at the security guard and saw something beside him. A pistol. Around 4 9mm ammo cases lay on the floor. One of those must have been for him. I slowly approached him and picked up the pistol. Jack, be careful with that, Molly grudgingly said. We need this, Molly. If these fucking animals wouldn't give mercy to him, what do you think they'll do to us? I roughly said. We need to leave. There's no time to waste, Molly. We left the security guard's body slumped against the wall, and we never looked back at it. I felt bad for him. I had no idea who he was, but no one should die like that, eaten alive by those affected animals. We finally made our way to the entrance of the court. However, something made us stop in our tracks. An absolute nightmare lay before us. Dozens of lions, leopards, panthers, and cheetahs were laying on the floor sleeping. We just stood there with disbelief and absolute horror. How are we going to get to the exit now? What now? I whispered as softly as I could. I don't know. Molly shivered. We need to step around them. What? Molly whispered with shock. Can you think of anything else? I whispered, hoping for a better plan. Unfortunately, she did not. I looked around the mess of giant cats on the floor and saw a sizable gap in the chaos of tattered fur. I stepped forward and I landed my foot precisely in the middle of the gap. The problem was that it could only fit one person. I looked around for another spot and nearly had a heart attack when one of the lionesses yawned. It was still asleep. Thankfully, I found another spot and stepped further in this organic minefield. However, in this case, I'll be mauled to death instead of being blown to pieces. As I carefully stepped into the gap, I gestured for Molly to follow. She shook her head in defiance. I couldn't blame her, but it was the only way we could get across. I couldn't just talk her into it now, so I just continued on. Eventually, she started to make her way into the first gap in the path that was predetermined by the sleeping felines. As we stepped our way through the field of giant cats, I saw a metal structure that was meant to be operated by a cheery salesman that would sell the overpriced chicken legs. Now, it was shut tight by metal shutters, and a rusted sign stood as the only evidence of any sort of establishment. I looked towards Molly, and I pointed towards the structure's roof. She understood the plan, and I stepped up on the wooden counter of the structure. I held the roof and set my other foot on the sign that lay crooked on the wall. I pulled myself up to the roof and looked towards Molly at the bottom. She soon began to climb up the structure, and her foot landed upon the crooked sign. Then, a loud screeching sound emanated from the sign as the metal started to bend and break under the pressure. It then ended painfully with a loud clatter as it fell to the floor. It all took only 10 seconds, but it felt like it was 10 minutes. I looked at the lions below, and I saw the twinkle of their eyes begin to dimly shine. Slowly, more and more of them started to get up from the concrete floor. I felt like time just stopped at that very moment. It tortured me with the feeling of death waiting for us just a few feet below us. A death that would be more painful and horrific than anyone's imaginations. As the situation became more clear, I pulled Molly up to the roof as a large claw came swinging towards Molly's leg. Molly yelped, and she stumbled onto the floor of the structure's roof. I turned around and saw a gash on Molly's leg. It was bleeding quite a bit, and she was starting to panic. I took off my jacket and wrapped it around her leg to try and stop the bleeding. Molly was sobbing. Giant cats were clawing at the structure, and the exit was so close. Molly, remember when I said I'll cover our butts if anything goes wrong? She nodded with tears still in her eyes. I hate to say this, Molly, but I'm going to draw them away. This is a stupid plan, I know, but this is the only thing I could think of. Take the USB and the gun, and run. I'll buy you some time. Jack, why does it have to be you? She weakly said. I got you into this. It's only right that you get out of here safely, I said, slowly regretting my decisions up to this point. Molly stared back at me. She didn't say anything else. I looked around for something to distract them with and saw the exhibits splitting off into different sections. I then thought about what happened earlier. One of the exhibits was opened by one of the activists, and it should be enough to get inside. And with the animals out of their cages, it should be empty. I'm going to lead them to the exhibits. I'll find a place to hide and see if I can wait them out. I'll be fine, Molly. Now get ready to run! I positioned myself near the edge of the structure and looked towards the invisible pathway ahead of me. Thousands of possibilities ran through my head. Many horrific scenes of disembowelment and a lot of blood. I washed those thoughts away. Now wasn't the time to get distracted. And just like that, I jumped and ran into the darkness ahead. My feet were pounding against the cracked concrete. A tight corridor of messy bushes was constantly shifting and rustling. The animals were chasing behind and beside me. I was hoping that the branches below me wouldn't decide to get in my way now. Running through the dark has always been something that I was used to, but not to this extent. I finally reached the first exhibit, and the two bodies still lay there with their entrails spilled all over the floor. I looked to the right and saw the hole in the dark exhibit. I squeezed my way through the hole and looked around for something to cover it. I found a long piece of log sitting on the side, and I pushed hard so that the heavy log could block the hole in the wall. Just as I did that, I heard the repeated slams against the metal gate. I shined the flashlight and saw multiple rabid eyes looking directly at me. It felt weird being in a cage like this, and a bit ironic too. Now who's looking at who? I said to myself, with a bit of a smirk. The clouded sky was now slowly being covered in a bright pink. The giant ball of fire we call the sun was slowly rising above the horizon. The shadows of the animals stretch from outside, and my shadow stretches towards the end of the cage. In the shadows that have not been graced by the sun's warm embrace, one singular eye opens in the corner of the cage. I looked towards it and a cold chill ran down my spine. A black cougar slowly moved out of the shadows with one eye still open. The other had blood dripping down from it. I knew that the thing that attacked me and dragged me from the vents, the one that tried to bite and maul me, the one I had stabbed with a screwdriver, was now in a cage with the one that stabbed them.
Me!
It prowled through the grass like I was their prey, and its one eye narrowed onto me. I tried to feel for the screwdriver, but I felt nothing. It must have fell out of my pocket while I was running into the exhibits. I looked towards the floor and saw a branch on the floor. It looked sturdy. I picked it up and held it like a baseball bat. It shook in my hands, and I felt like a poor prisoner waiting to be executed. Before I could compose myself, it dashed towards me with foam hanging out of its jaws. I aimlessly swung towards the foliage, and I felt resistance vibrate from the branch and into my arms. A heavy thunk echoed through my ears and a growl rumbled from the grass. I backed away towards a mess of branches standing on each other and readied my branch like a batter at a baseball game. However, the fear of missing still filled my mind thoroughly. I felt its singular eye watching me from every vantage point. To the left of me, to the right, and behind me. I looked behind me and was confronted by nothing but a tangle of grass and giant roots. However, the rapid crushing of foliage drew my attention towards the left, and I was tackled to the floor with a black, furious head biting down on my branch. Blood ran down my arms, and I didn't know whether it was mine or not. Drool sprayed around me as it struggled to get past my wooden barricade that I had in my hands. I felt this trembling in the palms of my hands, and my heart started to beat at a rate I can only describe as a trembling snare drum. My vision became blurry, and the gnashing teeth came closer and closer to my neck. A high-pitched clicking sound broke my thoughts, with the giant feline falling to the floor, twitching. Two metal prongs poked out of the black, matted furry mass that lay upon the floor. A capable set of hands pulled me from the floor and led me out of the cage. The animals outside were long gone, and the front entrance was desolate. As I was taken out of the zoo, I looked at my arms and saw several deep gashes along my arms. I was taken to the hospital and had to get several stitches on my arms. The doctors saw that I had some infection in the wounds, and I'll have to treat it with antibiotics. When I got to the waiting room, Molly was waiting there with a white bandage over her leg, similar to mine. She was glad I made it out somewhat okay. It was a miracle that we made it out with no life-threatening injuries. After we left, she told me what happened after I ran for the exhibits. She said that once most of the animals cleared a path, she ran as fast as she could towards the entrance and contacted the police through the booth. When they arrived and found me, she gave them the USB that showed who exactly was the culprit. When they checked the footage, it showed the activists drugging the animals through tampered water. Later, we had to appear in court in another city. We had to tell our side of the story and leave out the sneaking in part. We just told them about how we found drugs around the back of the bathrooms and how we reported it to security. When they showed the security footage in court, the leader didn't object to anything. He seemed to think that this was justified in some sort of sick way. We weren't there long enough to hear about his sentence, but I hope he gets at least life. This was several years ago, and I've already graduated from high school and college. I finally pulled my life together and tried to stay safe. Molly and I still stay in touch, and we meet every so often. I guess I can say I lived happily ever after, and it would sound a bit cliché. However, I guess it was the case this time around, and I think a happy ending is something that everyone wants. Anyway, I got to get back on my shift. The lions need tending to. Story 8. My best friend wears a face mask. When I was in junior high, a transfer student arrived in the middle of the semester, a kid that was different from everyone else. Right away he had caught my eye. In fact, he caught everyone's attention because he had a very unique disability. He couldn't speak. I guess you could say he was deaf, though it was clear to me after getting to know him that he could in fact hear. Every word spoken to him was understood with simple nods or gestures, facial expressions contorting into understood language. So I guess he was mute. Yeah, that would describe him best. He was an oddity to most, but to me he was a unicorn. Something that sparkled in our dim, monotonous lives, and it wasn't until he revealed who he was did I become terrified of him and his shine. I was in 7th grade, maneuvering my way through the jungle of middle school, avoiding trouble and premature violence. I was an undersized boy for my age, no more than 5 tall. Puberty had yet to visit me, leaving me left out of the herd. The other students, or the sheep as I called them, that infested my school, they were all the same. Kids that were driven by hormones, constantly talking about boys or girls, their deep voices riding on the coattails of the wind that breezed in and out of our hallways. I was a mere shadow, always walking a few paces behind the others, not wanting to be seen or acknowledged. I saw what others that looked like me went through. They were tortured and abused for simply existing. Once Bryce Ellis and his friends stuck Timmy Easton's face in the shitter for over 10 flushes. I was in a stall over, hiding and waiting for the torment to be over. I slithered my feet up onto the stool, caressing them to my chest, as I sat in a fetal position, horrified of how one human could treat another. Eventually the bullies had gotten bored. Their short attention span-driven minds directed them to another endeavor, leaving Timmy to fester in his tears and possible filth. He sobbed for minutes that felt like hours as I remained silent in the stall over. I placed my hand cautiously on the barrier wall, trying to absorb a bit of his pain. My heart ached for him in that moment, and I wanted to lend him a compassionate hand, if only I had the courage to do so. So yeah, I did my best to stay hidden, unseen to all the dwellers that mindlessly walked in and out of our school on a daily basis. The boys that believed themselves to be men, or the girls that pontificated to anyone that listened. I was lost into an enthralled sea of vindictive young adults that searched for any reason to lash out at anyone that stood in their way. So when Tape Boy, as they would eventually call him, came to my little middle school that stood still in the secluded hills of our small town, I was enthralled almost immediately with his existence. He was introduced to my homeroom class. I sat in the back, burying my head into my arms, occasionally lifting my head to listen on the day's lecture, my daydreams entertaining me as the clock slowly ticked away at our lives, and it wasn't until my teacher promptly stopped talking did it trigger a primal emotion in me to sit up and pay attention. I postured myself up straight, pausing the internal movie that played in my mind to see what the interruption was about. There he was, a new boy that no one had ever seen before. By middle school, everyone knew each other. We had went to the same elementary school, the same holiday events and grocery stores, so getting a new student was like getting a new flavor at Baskin-Robbins, a mystery taste simmering on the tip of your tongue as you digested every drop. His presence was intriguing. He wasn't small like me. I would say average height for a 12-year-old, about 5'4", slender body with unkempt dark black hair. He looked timid, his head tilted towards the ground, not wanting to accidentally lock eyes with any of us as the teacher introduced him. My mind wandering with such intrigue, because to all of our astonishment, he was wearing a surgical face mask. Mind you, this was in the 90s, eons before the COVID pandemic breached the windows of our thoughts. Right away I could hear the murmurs, the questions erupting throughout the classroom as everyone pondered of why this boy sheltered his face. I stared on for what must have been minutes as the shy boy kept his gaze down. I could see him slightly squeezing the arm straps to his backpack nervously the longer he stood there on full display for all. I had my fill and I relaxed my posture, sinking back into my chair, directing my stare out the window. But then Billy Sherman asked the question we all had on our minds. Why is he wearing that mask? Our teacher explained to us that it was because of some weakened immune system, something about how his ticker didn't click like the rest of ours. She then also told us about him being mute. This drew my eyes right back to him. I think it did for all of us, and for a moment, the quiet kid raised his head and locked eyes with me. His dark black eyes glistened with despair. The deep purple bags that sagged under his eyes were more indicative of someone that hadn't slept in days. I felt something for him in that moment. Our third eye conversing in some cosmic dialogue, and as quickly as he rose, his head did it drop once again towards the ground. I could still hear all the other kids snickering, questioning, and some even giggling. It made me sick. If I was a braver boy, I would have stood on top of my desk and verbally lashed out to all the sheep. Instead, I rose my hand asking something Mrs. Willis never said. What was the timid boy's name? Oh, I'm sorry. How rude of me. This is Gabriel. She sat Gabriel up front next to her desk, wanting him close in case he needed to write or sign something to her. And just like that, everyone went back to their simple lives, including myself. The next few weeks I saw little of Gabriel other than the back of his head during class. Once the bell rang, everyone that my eyes glimpsed at for the day disappeared, or just maybe it was me who dissolved into the ambience of our school. Either way, I saw little of the boy who wore a mask, the one that sheltered his true identity, and my curiosity with the new flavor of the week gradually faded into the abyss of non-existence. Well, that was until the day I saw the mask slip. It was end of the day. I spent most of the time turning corners any time Bryce Ellis approached, evading the wrath of him and his band of merry men who were the pinnacle of human torture, finding any opportunity to demean those who crossed their path. I remember leaving chemistry class, my mind all too occupied with leaving the hellhole of every kid's dread, and that's when I saw Gabriel walking down the hall towards the cafeteria, his head still tilted down, his gaze tracking every step he took, face mask still tightly fitted around his face. This time I saw someone was following him. It was Tom Ingram, one of Bryce's guys, a kid that tried to be the alpha male of the group numerous times, doing his best to dethrone the reign of Bryce. He was a big boy for his age, probably about 5'9" and easily weighed 200 pounds. He was a wild card, all right. He got caught pouring sugar down Mr. Whitaker's old Pontiac gas tank for giving him a poor grade. So when I saw him berating poor Gabriel, taunting him as grotesque laughter followed every insult, I felt like I had to do something, and my consistent stealth veneer of camouflage morphed into a full-on sprint towards the two. I saw Tom was closing in on him, other kids looking on with bewilderment on their faces, not knowing if they should laugh out of fear or grimace from disgust. For the first time in a long while, did a burning sensation of courage ignite in my soul. I was tired of seeing monsters preying on the sheep, and I was going to stop it somehow. Finally, Gabriel had stopped walking and stood still, his head hanging even lower than before. The strands of his long hair covered the remainder of his face. Tom began slapping the top side of the poor kid's head, yelling out obscenities, angered that he didn't stop sooner. I was close. I was going to stop this, since all anyone else could do is cower in fear while looking on, and then it happened, causing me to stop dead in my tracks. My eyes widening with befuddlement, Tom had torn away the mask from Gabriel's face. Pause with groans came from everyone. Then silence blanketed the entire school, and for those few seconds, our existence had been swallowed up by the earth itself. "What the hell?" Tom yelped out, breaking the still but heavy disquietude. I wanted to say something, but no words could be manifested, only gurgles as I choked on my own disbelief. The timid boy under the mask of intrigue had a strip of black duct tape covering his mouth, it stretching from the side of his face to the other, almost resembling what would be some hideous smile. The timid boy then collapsed his hands over his face as faint muffles of sobbing protruded from him. He ran into the nearest restroom only for Tom to pursue. Finally, my thoughts had been gathered while my body came back to life. I brushed off the bizarre occurrence of that grisly smile, and I reminded myself of what was about to happen. Tom was going to punish Gabriel for simply existing, as he and his gang had been doing for years, and like some old factory machine, the cogs of my body set into motion as I ran towards the restroom. Before I could open the door, the most horrid scream exploded outwards into the hallway, the sound sending a cold shiver down my spine, and Tom came running out of the restroom, gripping at his face, crying. He was hysterical, running and bumping into the walls until finally crumbling onto the floor, only to continue sobbing. My mind was clouded with a whirlwind of confusion. I no longer knew what to do. I was going to run in there and stop the assault, but now the assaulter was on the floor, destroyed. Then Gabriel calmly came out of the restroom, his mask firmly back on, and he turned to look at me, his dark eyes burning an image of anguish into my mind. I asked if he was okay. Of course he said nothing, though. He didn't need to. I could just sense his response, and it was one of gratitude. I almost could see him smiling at me from underneath the mask, and I reminded myself of what was under it, that abysmal duct tape that looked like a sinister grin. From that day on, most of the kids were afraid of Gabriel. I could see the look of terror in their eyes any time he passed by them, even though his head was still shifted downwards. But that's the day whenever someone mentioned him, they referred to him as Tape Boy. I had heard through the whispers of our school that Tom had suffered some mental breakdown, that the doctors couldn't find anything psychically wrong with him. It was as if his mind had shattered. He remained in some mental hospital, memories of him gradually fading, and the sheep went on with living their mundane lives. Bryce even slowed his bullying. I think he knew that there were now more eyes watching everyone after the altercation, and he didn't want to get caught in some bad situation, though I could see he was itching to get at Gabriel. I went back to being a shadow, avoiding all the others, still not too confident that the days of torture were over. Even though Gabriel was regarded as some magical or perhaps malevolent being by most, not sure which one, he still appeared to be sad, lonely, his head always dragging with despondency. I made an effort in getting to know him. I wasn't afraid like the rest of them. Something about the day we locked eyes gave me the resolve to understand he wouldn't hurt me. I approached him during lunch break. He was outside, sitting underneath a tree, the shade showering him a gloom of haze. I think I surprised him, or maybe it was just my stealth nature, but I saw him jump when I sat next to him. I began talking about the origins of Darth Vader, of how he was originally a hero, using his force power for good, only to eventually turn to the dark side. Gabriel just looked at me, confounded of why I was even talking to him, his stare looking on with indifference. I told him that he was like a superhero. Doing whatever he did to Tom was just like a superpower, that I was thankful. His gaze then returned back to the floor, almost out of shame. I guess whatever he did that day, he didn't see it as something special, or something to praise. I then told him that I still envied his ability to defend himself, that having such an ability was better than winning the school lottery, which was a week's supply of free cafeteria food. I kept blabbering on for the remainder of the break, while he still postured his stare towards the floor until the bell had finally rung. Before getting up, I told him that if I could have a superpower, mine would be invisibility. That's when he turned to me, pulling out a small spiral from his backpack, writing something down. He then showed me. Why? It read. I told him that I didn't like being seen, that if I could, I would melt away into the noise. Then life would be better. He just stared at me with what I could assume was disbelief. He didn't write anything back. He just remained seated while I stood to my feet. I asked if he was coming back to class, but he ignored me and just stared out into space, presumably lost in his own thoughts. For the next several months, I would catch Gabriel in the hallways, talk to him about the latest edition of whatever comic I was reading, Superman being my favorite, and I would go on and on about how his true superpower wasn't strength but hope. I think he became more comfortable with me, pulling out his spiral notebook to write down his thoughts, his questions and answers. A new gateway of communication had formed between us. Most times I could tell what he was going to write by looking at his eyes. Those dark, haunting eyes. He was a mysterious book, slowly being revealed to me, and I was completely beguiled by his friendship. Bryce and his little posse slowly went back to bullying the sheep, though they kept their distance from Gabriel and me. I guess I had a new protector, one that wouldn't be crossed, and something about that protection left me feeling proud. I knew in my heart that the timid kid that now went by Tape Boy wouldn't hurt a fly, that maybe the day of Tom going crazy was all by chance. Perhaps his rage snapped his mind. I tried asking him about that day numerous times, but he never explained what happened. He would redirect the conversation back to superheroes. I would walk home with him on certain days. Well, more like he would walk me home, I never got to see where he lived. He was too reserved to give up that kind of information, but the days we would walk together was always fun. I finally felt like I belonged. The longing emotion of needing acceptance was found by his friendship. One day when I was walking home by myself, I decided to stop in at the gas station to pick up a drink and scour the latest edition of comic books in the small rack of magazines. Before entering the store, I could hear arguing voices engaging in combative dialogue, and it became vividly clear that it was more of a yelling match than conversation. It was coming from the side of the building. Most times I would just ignore it, but one of the voices sounded all too familiar, and I crept slowly to the edge of the building, poking my head out to get a glimpse of the disturbance. It was Bryce. His back was up against the wall, while someone who I presumed was his father berated him with such a vicious snarl on his face. The angry man kept slapping Bryce across the face anytime he tried to say something, and soon tears began drizzling off the face of the mighty bully, only for the man to laugh. I didn't know why the older man was treating Bryce the way he was. Information cut out of my understanding. For all I know, it could have been because of something the bully did at school. I found it to be poetic justice that the boy that caused so much heartache suffered the same amount only at home. It felt like a cliché. The angry kid was angry because of the angry father. A cruel loop of never-ending proportions. Eventually, the man or father walked away, getting back into his car, leaving the bully to brush away the tears from his face. I cautiously retreated my head away, deciding to ditch the store completely when that same broken voice only minutes ago shouted out to me with a hefty dominance. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Bryce howled out. I didn't bother turning around. I just ran home, dodging into alleyways, trying my best to not be seen. It didn't appear as if he was following, but seeing him in such a vulnerable state was bemusing. We were a small town. How could I not know who the man was? We all knew each other since we were small, and then it hit me. Bryce's dad had left when he was little. This man must have been his stepdad, or perhaps Mom's boyfriend. It didn't matter. I was going to mind my own business. I was going to slither back into the shadows, but my attempts would only fall on defeated shoulders. I didn't want to tell anyone of what I saw. I hoped that keeping my mouth shut would have been enough for the bully to leave me be. Unfortunately, there is no reasoning when it comes to human beings. We base our actions on emotions, our anger, and Bryce confronted me the next morning in front of Gabriel. "Hey, Ferry, did you enjoy the show?" the angry kid spouted out at me. I tried explaining to him that I wasn't trying to intrude, that the arguing concerned me, that I didn't like seeing him being mistreated, and then he punched me right in the gut. I fell to the floor, gripping at my stomach, the pain slicing through every fiber of my body. I tried catching my breath, but inhaling was too painful, and I sheltered my face expecting another punch, but the bully walked off, leaving me to sweat. Gabriel kneeled down to me, taking out his spiral notebook, writing the obvious question. I gestured to him to give me a moment, and I honestly felt like crying. I had spent years doing my best to blend into the background. The invisibility power I was so desperate to have amongst the sheep was now gone. I was on Bryce's radar. For the remainder of the school year, I tried avoiding the bullies, the monsters that preyed on the sheep, but their leader would actively search for me. He was no longer intimidated by Gabriel. His once menacing allure had dwindled, and now we both were sitting ducks. Luckily, there was only a few weeks left until summer break, and I only had hoped that the time off would be enough for the monster of monsters to cool off. Entering summer was a relief much needed for my sanity. I took a few thrashings, but it was over. Me and Gabriel had big plans on spending time together. He wasn't an outdoor kind of kid. He usually would just come over my place and we would read my comic books. He quickly grew enchanted with the idea of superheroes, their powers restoring balance to the nature of our world. I enjoyed every minute of it. My parents, on the other hand, looked less jovial to our friendship. They didn't like the mask. It worried them. They thought that whatever illness he had could be passed on to me, but they didn't do anything to stop us from seeing each other. They only silently protested. So after a while, we decided to meet somewhere outdoors, away from my parents' judgmental stares. There was a creek close to my house, the trees giving us enough shade to stay cool on those long summer days. The small stream that flowed through the trenches of the creek enriched our view as we would find the perfect rock to perch on while reading our comics. We didn't see much of any of the other classmates that summer. The sheep kept their distance, or maybe it was just us. But the days seemed to pass quickly, and before we knew it, summer was coming to an end. I couldn't remember how many volumes we must have read, but Gabriel was now a fan of almost every superhero. He tended to raise out his arms while walking, mimicking the premise of flying like Superman, his ponderous eyes cutting through the brush as we escaped our secluded summer spot. It was on the final day of our summer break did I pressure the shy, timid boy to explain to me what had happened that day. The day Tom lost his marbles. I needed to know. Gabriel has always tried redirecting the conversation, holding up a comic of Batman, pointing at some dialogue. I got upset. I raised my voice, telling him that if we were friends, then he should tell me that there wasn't secrets between us, his heavy eyes collapsing to the ground, shifting his posture on the rock that we both sat on. Look, I just need to know. You're my best friend, I told him with genuine longing. The school year was about to start up again, and I could already envision a future of slithering through the hallways, how I have always done. But with Gabriel, maybe that could change. I needed to know, and I was done guessing, fantasizing that he was some superhero, or at least my hero, my protector. I stood up off the rock, walking over to the stream. The sound of water colliding onto the small stones that infested the trench triggered something awful in my gut. I took a deep breath and made my final stand with my best friend. If you don't want to tell me, then I'm going home. See ya, I said with impatience dripping off of my words. Gabriel ignored my warning and continued pointing at the comic book. That's when I noticed what he was pointing at. It wasn't dialogue, it was one of Batman's villains. He was pointing at Clayface. This made me stop, my minding halting after speeding at 100 miles per hour, it crashing my thoughts. Yeah, what about Clayface? I curiously asked with a withered and tired voice. That's when his pointer finger was no longer on the page, but rather it was pointed towards his mouth. The mouth that was hidden behind his mask. He could see my face drop with sadness. Whatever disfigurement he had underneath that horrid black duct tape must have been something like the villain from the comic, and my heart broke for him. Gabriel's eyes gleaming with absolute sorrow. The boy that only wanted to be left alone. The person all the others feared just wanted solitude, and here I was badgering him to no end about something so insignificant. We stared at each other for several seconds, our eyes meeting in some altered state, and I reached my hand up to his face tenderly, taking off his mask. There it was, the black duct tape that resembled a grin, a nightmarish one that could only been seen in some horror movie. I then placed my fingers on the edge of the tape, my cold grip causing him to shiver, and I slowly began to remove it. "What the hell are you fairies doing?" A voice called out from the brush, one that sank my heart into my stomach. I turned, trying to locate the voice, and sure enough, there he was. The bully that had tortured so many for so many years. It was Bryce. His body slowly revealing itself from the brush, like some despicable ooze frothing from the depths of hell. Though, something about him was different. His cold stare no longer fictitious, but more intimidating, and as his body fully emerged, did I see the blood trickling down his soaked, stained shirt. He was covered in the crimson fluid. There was even some on his cheeks, almost as he had some open wound and smeared the remnants of it on his face. The devilish grin that bestowed his bruised and beaten face quickly led me to a conclusion, one that I wish I didn't conclude. A purplish black infested the outlayer of his left eye. It practically closed shut, and his nose had been bent to an unsightly angle. I started to whimper as my lips trembled from fright, because this Bryce was not the same one that had given us wedgies or swirlies. This one was a true monster, a beast that devoured souls. His gaze was enough to display a vacancy of any humanity, and my eyes crawled down his arm into his hand to see the black pistol that he firmly gripped. Bryce, what happened? Are you okay?" I groaned out while sniffling. He didn't answer. He just kept grinning at me. The ghastly smile that stretched ear from ear plagued my vision, and I knew that he had done it, that he had hurt someone badly. I was terrified, and in the moment I had completely forgotten about Gabriel. My tunnel vision only focused on that firearm. "Where the hell did the other one go?" the monster asked. I turned and realized Gabriel, in fact, had run away, leaving me behind. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee while screaming, but horror kept me in place, and I felt like some deer trapped in headlights, contemplating my entire life in mere seconds. "Everyone always messes with me," Bryce yelled out with such ferociousness. There was no talking my way out of this one, no pleading. I knew in that moment he was going to kill me, his rage overflowing to the point of lunacy. He quickly pounced, dropping me to the floor, screaming with madness, and he repeatedly hit me over the head with the butt of the gun, causing me to see stars. His words became incoherent, sounding like muffled tones that slushed its way into my hearing. I shook my head, trying to collect myself. Just maybe I could figure a way out of this, but as soon as my vision corrected itself, Bryce would strike me another time, causing it to blur once again. I fell into a darkness, my world collapsing into an eternal void of loneliness as my body began to float effortlessly. But as soon as I thought this was my final moments, flashes of Gabriel flooded into my mind, awakening me out of whatever slumber I found myself in. That's when I realized Bryce was no longer hitting me. Instead, he was talking to someone, and as I grabbed at my head, trying to steady my balance, I saw it was Gabriel, standing still, head as always tilted downwards. Bryce confronted him, pointing his 9mm directly at his head, yelling, screaming at the top of his lungs. But my best friend remained unmoved, just quiet, and then he slowly removed his mask. This caused Bryce to pause, his tone weaken, and I think for the first time he digested if he should proceed doing what he was doing. "What are you doing, freak?" the bully yelped out. Gabriel remained quiet, eyes still directed towards the floor, his breathing escalating. I could see his chest pump more vigorously with each passing second. With the mask off me, and Bryce could see the bewildering black duct tape strapped to his face, Gabriel's face began to tremble violently, as if he was trying to yell through the bondage. He then finally began to peel of the thick layer of black duct tape, and it came off with a wicked screech as I could see my friend's eyes squint with pain. Bryce was no longer pointing the gun at Gabriel. No longer was he even saying a word, his arm lowered to his side, and both him and I stared on with amazement. What was under the tape was layers of skin, twisting and binding to each other like some thriving organism living its own life on Gabriel's face. I couldn't move. I couldn't say anything. I was in shock, and my head still throbbed from pain. Then Gabriel's mouth, if you want to call it that, began to stretch open. He tilted his head backwards, while the mountain of dead flesh started to drip down his face, allowing some endless void to open up inside of him. I could hear the cracking of bones breaking, his jaw shifting to accommodate the massive hole that was now his mouth, and then horrid, dwindling fingers began to protrude from the darkness. My mouth gaped open with trepidation, and if I had the ability to adjust my head, I would think Bryce had the same facial expression. Then a grotesque head forced its way out of my friend's mouth, revealing a face that could only exist in the realms of the dead. This new creature having two large almond-shaped eyes that looked very similar to the ones that were attached to my friend. This thing then stared at Bryce. That's all it did. No words were spoken, no violence was created. It just stared at him, and soon the bully grasped at his face and began to yell. He ran frantically in different directions, his gun firing out into the tree line. I jumped for cover, falling to the floor, sheltering my head with my arms. Bryce's terrified screams caused my stomach to turn, and soon those dire cries stopped along with the gunshots. I must have stayed on the floor for what felt like hours, too scared to rise to my feet, and through my peripheral did I see the sun begin to set, plunging the small creek into darkness. I eventually mustered up enough courage to get up, and I looked around. Bryce was mere feet away from me. He lay still on the floor, blood spewing out of his head. It appeared as if he'd shot himself. I walked over to his body, befuddled of what to do. I then remembered Gabriel. I turned to look for him, but he was gone. It was only me and Bryce's dead corpse. I ran home telling my parents about everything. of the encounter I experienced. At first it seemed as if they didn't believe me, but they still phoned for the police. I led them to the creek to the bully's dead body. I initially thought perhaps they would blame me, connect me to his death, but the police believed me. Well, they believed me about Bryce, but not about Gabriel. They told me that Bryce had killed his stepfather. Apparently they had gotten into some altercation, and afterwards he went into his mother's bedroom and shot her to death. They told me that the once bully was a disturbed individual, suffering abuse for many years, that I was lucky to escape from his wrath. I told them that they needed to find my friend. I wanted to know if he was okay, but all the officers could do was pat my back with sympathy, trying to relax me. It has almost been 30 years since the event. I still have nightmares of what had happened. I see the dead stare Bryce had while pointing his pistol at me. I see him repeatedly hitting me over the head again and again. Though, what still haunts me more is Gabriel's mouth contorting into that horrid shape, revealing the creature that lived inside of him. He was never found. I'm pretty sure he moved on to another city, another place where bullies like Bryce tormented their schools, and I could only imagine Gabriel was there to balance the wrongs of the world. I'm scared of my best friend, but I know at the same time he is my protector, my superhero. He is out there doing good. I can feel it, and I hope he can sense my love for him. Maybe we will never meet again. Perhaps it's not written in the stars for us to reunite, but one thing is for sure. I get comic books mailed to me randomly every month. Most are of Superman, and I know exactly who they are from. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.